Welcome back, Beef Bergenovs. The Word Shark returns, but before that, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and if you got any, give a chapter bro some high points. It'll be greatly appreciated. Now, let's get into the video.
The void was not silent. It groaned through the hull in long, slow waves, a sound felt more than heard. It pressed against the ancient plates of the war bark, like the weight of a drowned world, like an abyssal trench leaning down upon a creature that had learned to breathe darkness long before men learned to name the stars. Out here, beneath the galactic plane, the void felt older and more predatory than anywhere the Imperium charted. The Astronomicon was only a pressure at the back of the skull, a faded ache rather than a guiding blaze. Some of the mortals aboard the Nicor said its light did not truly reach this far anymore, that what they felt was only a memory echoing through their gene flesh. They called this region the Deeps, and they whispered that even demons hesitated to cross it. The Carcharodons hunted here. The nomad predation fleet drifted like a circling pack, hulls dark and scarred, running lamps dimmed to blood embers. The Nicor prowled at their center. Charybdis class wore bark so colossal that smaller escort craft could anchor to its flanks like remoras clinging to a shark. Its vox masts had been remade into totems of bone and rusted iron, its prow adorned with the jaw of some long-forgotten void Leviathan. No one aboard knew if the beast had ever truly existed. All that mattered was that the image suited the chapter. Sorev the Voidsman had served upon other ships before the Nicor took him. Those vessels had felt like machines, like human will hammered into steel. The Nicor did not feel like that. The Nicor felt like an ecosystem's apex predator. He stood at an armored viewing slit on one of the dorsal gun decks, peering out into the thinning starfield. There was very little to see. The spiral arm was distant behind them. Before them lay only scattered pricks of light, cold and remote, barely more than optical noise in a sea of black. Behind him, giants moved. Their reflections flickered in the armor glass. Ghost shapes, crossing the voidscape. Grey ceramite, battle-scored and marked with kill glyphs. Faded, almost colorless chapter badges, the stylized form of a hunting shark. Chains of real teeth, taken from beasts and men and xenos alike, hung from plate and backpack housings. Some warriors had filed their own helm lenses into ragged predatory shapes. Others wore their helmets bare at their belts, faces pallid and scarred, eyes as cold as the stars outside. They did not speak. They did not need to. Their silence was a presence as heavy as gravity. Sorev kept his gaze forward, because he had learned that to stare at them was to risk being noticed. And when the sharks noticed you, it was usually because you were to be bled. The deck trembled beneath his boots. Not the groan of void pressure now, but a different shudder, mechanical and rising. The flickering lumen strips along the overhead ribs shifted to a warning hue, deep red bleeding through dim white. Somewhere to his right, a prayer bell began to swing. The first strike of the alarm rolled through the ship like the toll of a massive gong. It reverberated along the bulkheads, a basso chime that turned the Nicor into a cathedral organ. Sorev felt it in his teeth. Other bells answered across other decks, each a note in an orchestration of impending violence. Command cant cymbals pulsed across the brass rail before him, Auspex relays talking to one another in machine tongue. Green runes became amber, then red. A stylized eye widened, its pupil dilating as the ship's instruments focused on some distant void anomaly. Contact, someone whispered behind him. Mortals did that, as though naming it quieter might make it less true. Sorev risked a glance at the reflected display. At first he thought it a simple Auspex storm, some radiation surge or warp ghost, just another of the deep's many strange echoes. But the signal did not scatter and fade. It grew. It cohered. The flicker of random static became a mass, knot of pulsing returns expanding across the hololithic grid. Shapes resolved out of the noise. They were not metal. They were not angular, not the hard lines of human or heretic hulls. They were organic, curving, bulbous. A tide of ovoid forms threaded through with feeder tendrils, escort nodes, smaller organisms clustered around greater behemoths, like parasites clinging to a moving continent. Sorev had seen picked feeds of Tyranid fleets before. Grainy archive images, always from a distance, always as something happening at the edges of known space. Those images had not conveyed scale. The thing rising from the dark beneath the galaxy was a swarm made of swarms, a converging stormfront of living hulls and drifting spore clouds. It was not a fleet in the human sense. It was the manifestation of an appetite, a physical curve of hunger sweeping toward the underbelly of the spiral arm. The Vox chimed a command rune just below Sorev's ear, sharp as a knife. He flinched and snapped. To attention. "All gun deck personnel to battle stations," the voice intoned. It was a serf overseer, not an Astartes, but he had long ago learned to mimic their flat, effectless tone. "By order of the Shade Lord, this is not a drill." Sorev dragged his eyes from the view and ran. He pounded along the deck, past the stalking bulk of Terminators, heading inward toward the core of the ship. Storm bolters clutched in gauntlets, the heavy plates of their tactical dreadnought armor hissing softly where ancient servos flexed. None of them spared the mortals a glance. Their helms were already sealed, their attention turned inward toward squad vox channels and death oaths. The gun deck began to come alive. Servitor cradles opened like coffins, twitching things of flesh and steel lowering themselves into firing harnesses. Tech-favored mortals in red-striped coveralls scurried along void shutter mechanisms, blessing them with oils as they thudded shut. Vox traffic thickened. Curt. Code bursts, slotting into one another like the teeth of a saw. The Nikor was waking. The Predator had scented something in the water. High above the gun decks, at the heart of the warbark, the command bridge burned in the dim light of tactical hololiths. Tyberos stood at the edge of the primary display, a looming statue of grey armor and scar tissue. Even among the transhuman giants of his kind, he was massive, the ceramite of his suit layered and reinforced until he looked less like an Astartes and more like some industrial engine given warrior form. His helm rested upon a spike of blackened adamantium beside the command rail. He had gone bareheaded, though the battle rage that lent his eyes their corpse-blue glow whispered that he would soon don the mask again. Locks of long, ash-grey hair lay braided back from a face carved in harsh planes, marked by old cuts and the white spidering of healed fractures. His skin had the stretched, weathered look of a veteran repeatedly, exposed to void and radiation. Upon his gauntlets, the lightning claws, hunger and slake slept. Each housed a nest of adamantium talons, sheathed for now, each finger tipped instead in a brutal crushing plate. The storm generators that would wreathe those talons in pale lightning were quiescent, their hum absent from the bridge. For the moment, the claws hung heavy and silent over the rail, like the resting limbs of a predator draped over the lip of a pool. Below him, the hololithic display showed the oncoming swarm. It was a slowly unfurling bloom of red motes, already larger than the icon cluster representing the Nikor and its attendant escorts. Auspex cogitators sketched scale estimates along the display's edge, converting the raw signals into approximate masses. The numbers were irrelevant. One glance told Tyberos what he needed to know. The thing coming toward them was large enough to notice, large enough to be worthy of the hunt. "Shade Lord," the voice came from his right, low and respectful, accented with the harsh syllables of some ocean world long lost to imperial maps. Takaharangi stood within a ring of hooded serfs and servo skulls, his blue armored form hooded and cape-draped, bare head-shaved, save for ritual tattoos along his scalp. His eyes were closed, his hands clasped around the iron-bound haft of his force staff. "The warp echoes confirm it," the librarian murmured. "It is not a mere splinter. This is part of a greater body, a tendril, drawn up from the abyss. The hunger behind it." He grimaced, teeth clenched. "It is larger than any I have felt. Larger than Behemoth. Larger than Kraken. It is like drifting beneath the shadow of a world serpent." Tyberos did not look at him. His gaze remained on the hololith. "Can it bleed?" he asked. Takahurangi opened his eyes. They were dark, pupils dilated to almost nothing, inner lids flickering as he wrestled the psychic pressure back, the presence pressing at the shores. Of his mind was not the chattering chorus of demons or the distant cold focus of Xenos machine intelligences. It was a single titanic will, made of unending hunger, reaching across light years through the medium of the warp. "Yes," he said, "for a time." The Shade Lord's lips twitched. It was not quite a smile, not quite a baring of teeth. A tiny movement only, but the mortals in the pits below seemed to collectively flinch, as if the temperature had dipped. "Then we hunt," Tyberos said. His voice was a rasp, barely above a whisper, yet it carried along the bridge as clearly as a shout. Mortal officers and tech adepts paused in their work for a heartbeat, hearing that quiet doom and remembering that every man who had stood on this deck before them and failed was long since dead. "Signal the pack," Tyberos continued. "All claws forward. We close with the swarm. No range engagement, no feint. We take its fangs in our teeth and drag it down." One of the mortal officers turned from his console, pallid under the bridge lights. The man wore the black and grey of the fleet command cadre, a collar of metallic nodes threading into his flesh from the interface harness. Sweat had begun to bead at his temples. "My lord," he began, "if we hold the outer orbit and let it come to us, our macro cannon and lance batteries can whittle it down. At distance, the—" Tyberos turned his head, just enough that one pale eye locked onto the man. The officer's words died. His throat worked soundlessly. "There is no distance," Tyberos said, soft as falling ash. "There is only the eaten and that which does the eating. The beast is coming to the worlds of man, so we go to it." His attention slipped back to the swarm display, dismissing the mortal as completely as if the man had left the room. "Bring us about," he said. "All ahead. Give the void our broadside and drag claws along the hulls of their leading beasts. We will take it to head on our decks." Command runes flashed. Helmsmen chanted course corrections. The Nikor rumbled as her massive engines bit into the fabric of the void, altering the warbark's drift. Flotilla escorts adjusted in obedience, a constellation of predator craft turning to rake across the oncoming bioships like teeth closing along a throat. Takahurangi drew a slow breath. "The closer we come," he said, voice pitched low for the Shade Lord alone. "The stronger its mind will press upon ours. That will not be merely audible to librarians, Tyberos. It will crack weaker mortal skulls. It will gnaw at the edges of lesser Astartes. It has already tasted 1,000 worlds. We are prey to it, by reflex." Tyberos flexed his gauntlets. The claws of hunger and slake stirred, a faint click of machine spirits shifting in their housings. "Then we teach it," he whispered, "that prey has teeth." The first salvo from the Tyranid vanguard came as a wash of faint light across the void, like distant meteor showers. Organic torpedoes, bloated things grown to die, streaked toward the Carcharodon's formation. Between them drifted clouds of spores, hive minds in miniature, each packed with some lethal payload of acid or microorganisms or burrowing things. The Nikor answered with thunder. Macro cannon batteries boomed along her flanks, each shot a metal mountain hurled at a fraction of light speed. The sound of the guns was a physical thing, pounding through the decks, making Sorev's bones vibrate in his skin, as he settled into his gunnery station harness. Sacred shell casings rolled along the gratings, still warm from forging, fed into loading rigs by chanting serfs. "Primary batteries 1 to 4. Fire as they bear," came the command cant. "Secondary decks, prepare to rake." Sorev's firing slit showed only the briefest flashes, pale shapes gliding past, too fast and too vast for his mortal brain to comfortably register. The Auspex overlay painted, some of them in stark warning red. Hive drone ships, swollen with gestation sacs. Escort beasts, long and sinuous, like the ribs of some titanic skeletal serpent come to life. Clouds of smaller organisms streaked between them, intent on clogging void shields and stripping armor. The first impacts shook the Nicor like an animal shouldering another predator. Biotorpedoes burst against the Warbark's shields in blossoms of actinic fire. Some got through, striking ancient ceramite with wet thuds that made Sorev think of meat thrown against a wall. Acid gnawed at armor. Spines 10 times a man's height snapped and lodged in reinforcement ribs. Smaller escorts fared worse. One cruiser near the Nicor's port side vanished in a wound of green light as a bioplasma lance from a distant hive ship punched through its spine and tore it apart. "Maintain advance," came the calm bridge-level command. "All ships, maintain advance." The Nicor's plasma destructor spoke. There was no sound for Sorev to hear, not at his station, but he felt the weapon fire. The entire ship seemed to freeze for a heartbeat, every lumen flickering, every cogitator hum dipping. Then the power bled forward, channeled through sanctified conduits into the vast, snarling heart of the dorsal weapon. The Warbark spat a spear of star-white energy into the void. It punched through a hive drone ship as if it were paper, boiling a line through its organic hull. The thing recoiled, venting superheated atmosphere and screaming organisms into space, then began to break apart, its guiding synapse nodes cooked to ash. "Good kill," someone muttered on the gun deck. Another servitor hissed Binharic approval. Out beyond the roil of macrofire and bioplasma, the battle became more complex. Imperial boarding torpedoes streaked from launch tubes along the Nicor and her escorts, their conical forms wrapped in flickers of guiding Auspex light. They crossed paths with bloated Tyranid, organisms that served the same purpose, bulbous, tendril-studded things, birthing spores, even as they burned toward the Carcharodon's hulls. Sorev watched them intersect, mesmerized. Here, his training told him, the real war began, not in void exchanges of mass and energy, but in the ramming of hull to hull, in the cutting of airlocks, in the sudden birth of alien atmospheres and the clash of boarding shields. To the Carcharodons, distance engagements were only the scent trail. The kill was always up close. He could almost see it in his mind's eye. He imagined the boarding torpedoes of his chapter, punching through chitinous armor, ceramite beaks drilling into flesh walls and spilling forth storm-armed giants into twitching, shrieking corridors. He imagined the reverse, the alien spores that did the same, bursting into void black gun decks and disgorging scuttling things with too many limbs and too many teeth. He tightened his grip on the gunnery levers, knuckles whitening. "Eyes on your task, Voidsman," his overseer barked from behind. "You will have time enough to pray when they reach us." In the strategium, Tyberos watched the icons of his boarding torpedoes scatter toward the front rank of the swarm. Each represented a squad, a dozen brothers encased in armor and hatred, ready to tear their way through whatever they struck. Each was a tooth, driven into the flesh of an immense moving carcass. "Shade Lord," intoned one of the tech adepts at the communications altar, mechadendrites twitching. "Teleportarium arrays stand ready. Target solutions for near-space insertion into leading contact hulls at approximate confidence thresholds." The adept hesitated, caught between the mechanized precision of his order and the utter alien nature of the bioships they were attempting to lock onto. There were no familiar bulkheads, no metal nodes for the machine spirits to cling to. Only tissues, vibrating and pulsing with more life than any sane instrument wanted to comprehend. Tyberos did not care for the details. "Charge the arrays," he said. "Full pattern. Red Brethren to assault stations. We take the heart from the nearest great beast." Tekahurangi frowned, gaze flickering toward the hololith representation of the biggest Tyranid vessel in the forefront, a vast ovoid mass whose icon was ringed with sigils for synaptic density and biosign saturation. "That creature is the size of a small world," the librarian said. "Within it are hives within hives, forests of nerve tissue, seas of digestion pools. It will not feel our presence the way an iron ship feels borders. It may not even know we are there until we do our work." "All the better," Tyberos replied. He lifted his helm from the spike, lowering it over his head. The ancient seals hissed as they bit home, interlocking plate and flesh and machine. The world narrowed to the bite of the kinesthetic array and the cold clarity of autosenses. His predator vision sharpened, colors flattening to useful bands. "We are not coming to be seen," he said, his voice now a vox-modulated growl. "We are coming to kill." Deep within the Nikor's core, the teleportarium glowed. Vast emitter rings circled a dais marked with sigils of warding and kill script, their surfaces inscribed not with imperial eagles, but with stylized jaws and crescent teeth. Capacitors throbbed with caged energy. Servo cherubs and robed tech adepts bustled around the peripheral machinery, making last-minute adjustments, chanting the litanies that kept the contraption's fickle machine spirit compliant. The Red Brethren assembled upon the platform. They were giants even among giants, each encased in blessed tactical dreadnought armor, each suit bearing the scars of a dozen or more boarding wars. Their grey plate had been blackened by the smoke of burned atmospheres and streaked with the faded remains of other chapters' blood marks. Shark-tooth chains hung across their chests. Some had had their helm masks fashioned into death visages, stylized shark skulls frozen in an eternal bite. They formed into silent phalanxes, weapons held ready. Storm bolters mag-locked to gauntlets, chain fists and power hammers and lightning claws, shimmering faintly as their fields idled at low charge. No one spoke. No one recited formal prayers. Their devotions were written in scars and the weight of their steps. A lone tech adept stood at the edge of the platform, clutching a staff topped with a cluster of spinning sensor vanes. He stared at the assembled Terminators and felt for a fleeting instant very small indeed. "Vox links are muted, honored ones," he said, more to fill the silence than out of necessity. His voice sounded thin in the vast chamber. "Signal discipline per the Shade Lord's directive. We will transmit you into the heart of the target organism as precisely as our augurs allow. The Omnissiah guide." His words trailed away. None of the Red Brethren acknowledged him. Helm lenses stared forward, unblinking. The silence seemed to deepen, thick and heavy, a pressure in the air. Even the constant hum of the teleport machinery felt as if it had drawn back, as if the ship itself were holding its breath. The adepts of the machine cult were used to battle cries. They had heard the roaring litanies of other chapters, the bellows of the Black Templars, the thunderous catechisms of the Imperial Fists. They had watched warriors go to war wrapped in sound, drowning their fear in noise. The Carcharodons had no need of that. The tech adept realized, with a faint flutter of meat-heart unease, that this was their war cry, this utter absence of speech, this self-imposed muting of every vox and every ritual word. It was the silence of a predator gliding through dark water, of a shark cutting toward a shoal with no ripple to betray its motion. It felt like the pause before a Leviathan breached, the whole ocean drawing breath. "Teleportarium," came Tyberos' voice over the command channel, calm and quiet. "On my mark." The capacitors screamed as they filled. Light began to gather around the emitter rings, a painful actinic radiance that painted the Terminators in stark monochrome. "In," whispered the Shade Lord. The air tore. The Red Brethren vanished in a flare of ozone and frost, hurled as a spear of silent hatred into the living heart of the oncoming swarm. Reality tore. Light and cold and pressure slammed together in a single instant as the teleport engines hurled the Red Brethren from the gut of the Nikkor into the heart of the beast. For a heartbeat, there was no up, no down, no distance, only the shriek of displaced air and the terrible sense of being smeared across a gulf wider than thought. Then, the world slammed back. They arrived in a storm of ozone and hoarfrost, a thunderclap of displaced atmosphere rippling outward. The impact of their sudden presence ripped a wound through the hive ship's own flesh. Organic walls buckled, splitting like overripe fruit. Tubes and conduits that had pulsed with alien fluids a breath before now burst, raining glistening ichor in heavy curtains across ceramite and bone. Tyberos took the shock in a half-step, his massive frame absorbing the recoil. His boots gouged furrows into the living floor, crushing fibrous tissues beneath their weight. Around him, the Red Brethren formed a rough circle, Terminator plate hissing as teleport frost crackled along their armor. Vapor hugged the ground, coiling around their greaves like mist over a midnight tide. The hive ship reacted, its vascular tunnels clenched, musculature tightening instinctively around the intrusion. The walls flexed in painful spasms, flesh ridges contracting. Pores opened and shut in stuttering waves. The whole corridor became a convulsing throat, trying to vomit them back out. Something skittered in the distance, claws hammering against meat and cartilage. Tyberos raised his hands. Hunger and Slake awakened. The lightning claws roared to life, storm generators feeding ravenous energy along adamantium spines. Fields crackled into being, with a sound like distant surf, smashing against rock. Chain mechanisms nested inside the gauntlets snarled as they spun up, each bladed finger now sheathed not only in crackling light, but in tearing, churning teeth. The first wave of Hormagaunts hit them like a breaking tide. They came on all fours, multi-limbed silhouettes sprinting along the blood-slick floor and clambering along the walls and ceiling with equal ease. Scythe limbs flashed in the hive ship's internal bioluminescence, pale and wicked. Distended second jaws yawned open, shrieking soundlessly in the vacuum-tight tunnel. Tyberos moved to meet them. For a man, the Terminator plate would have seemed to imprison. For the Shade Lord, it was merely an exoskeleton for violence, an extension of muscle and will. He surged forward with a speed that would have looked impossible even in lighter armor, hunger sweeping out in a low, ripping arc. The first Hormagaunt simply came apart. It did not die neatly. There was no clean cut. Lightning-sheathed adamantium intersected with chitin and flesh, and the internal chain maws bit into whatever they touched. Limbs vanished. Bodies became fragments. The gaunt's momentum carried what was left of it past Tyberos in a disintegrating spray. Another sprang onto his chest, claws scraping at his gorget. Slake rammed up beneath its ribcage, punching through, talons raking, teeth churning. The creature was lifted, shredded, discarded in pieces. A third tried to leap past him toward the Terminators at his back. Hunger flicked out, casual and precise, and the alien's midsection was not where it had been a heartbeat before. The corridor filled with motion and killing. Storm bolters thudded in the hands of the Red Brethren, mass reactive shells chewing through waves of lesser Tyranids. Chain fists whined as they hacked down leaping beasts in single brutal strokes. A power hammer descended like a falling meteor, smashing a cluster of gaunts into a wet, twitching smear that the living floor gratefully absorbed. To the mortals who would later see the picked captures, It looked less like a fight and more like an act of weather that had decided to hate. Takahurangi stood a little apart from the main crush, iron-shod staff braced in both hands. Psychic wards glimmered faintly along his armor, reacting to the unseen pressure pouring through the ship. His mind reached not outward, but inward, sinking into the grey tide of the Tyranid synaptic web. The thing that awaited him there was not a mind, not as humans understood it. It was the sensation of plunging into a bottomless ocean in the dark of some forgotten abyss, where the only light was the glittering reflection of other drowning souls. He felt currents of will, vast and cold, turning toward the point where the Red Brethren had penetrated the Hive ship's flesh. Larger presences slid beneath him like whales beneath a swimmer, their shadows alone enough to crush lesser psychers. Synaptic response, he voxed, voice clipped, clinical. There was no room for awe here. Multiple nodal clusters converging on our position. Warrior forms, larger biotanks. The swarm is redirecting. Other librarians answered across the link, their tones equally measured. They were scattered along different vectors of the ship, each with their own escort of Terminators and Assault Marines, each taste of the psychic pressure slightly different. "Feels it," came a dry voice from one of the other boarding teams. "Curious, irritated, like we have bitten a nerve. Let it feel more," Tikahurangi responded. "Shade Lord, the node concentrations are significant. It is committing more to this defense than it has yet committed to the fleet action as a whole." Tyberos did not answer in words. His reply was the way he drove his armored shoulder into the next rank of Hormagaunts, sending them pinwheeling, the way his claws carved a path through them with unstoppable regularity. Every motion was precise, every blow excessive in the force it expended, as though he was determined to deny the aliens even the dignity of a clean death. Behind him, in the lee of that storm, the mute flag-bearer walked. The serf's name had once been Yoso. It had been taken from him along with his tongue in the rituals that had bound him to the Nicor. Now he was simply the bearer, a thin, scarified figure wrapped in grey and black, spine bowed under the weight of the ship's sigil. The banner was a slab of flensed hide, treated and tanned until it might as well have been steel. Upon it was rendered the Nicor's totem, the hunting shark picked out in dark, dried blood. It was his duty to keep it held high in the worst of the fighting, to follow the Shade Lord wherever he went, and mark the place where the chapter's bite had fallen. He saw everything. He saw the way Tyberos advanced, not as a man drove forward, but as a weather front crawled over land, slow and completely unstoppable. Each step planted exactly where it needed to be, crushing down the slumped carcass of an alien or bracing against the hammering impact of scythe claws. Each swing of hunger and slake was overkill, built not only to kill, but to maim the ship itself, ripping gouges through the living walls and spraying fresh waves of ichor across the corridor. Yoso, who had seen storm fronts consume the coastlines of his birth world, recognized that same mindless, inevitable malice in the Shade Lord. It was not command. It was not strategy. It was nature. A junior Terminator pushed up alongside Tyberos, the shark teeth along his helm still bright with the chemical sheen of fresh repairs. His storm bolter barked point blank into the chest of a leaping gaunt, the creature folding in half around the detonations. "The beast runs deep, Shade Lord," he voxed on the tight, encrypted channel reserved for the Terminators alone. His voice carried no fear, only a curious respect, as if he had finally glimpsed the true scale of the thing they had bitten. Tyberos did not turn his head. "The deeper the waters, brother," he rasped, "the larger the prey." He punched both claws forward into the nearest bulkhead. Hunger and slake sank wrist-deep into the ship's flesh. The walls convulsed, the whole tunnel shuddering as nerve bundles were severed. Tyberos dragged his arms apart with a grinding effort that would have torn any human limb from its socket. The living tissue screamed in pressure and motion. Fibers parted, cartilage cracked. A ragged gash opened in the wall, spilling a hot rain of viscous fluid that steamed where it splattered against Terminator plate. Beyond the rent lay another tunnel, narrower, pulsing, leading deeper into the hive ship's interior. Tyberos stepped through the rupture without hesitation, carving his own path through the beast rather than following the routes it had prepared. Behind him, the Red Brethren flowed after, trusting instinct, trusting their Shade Lord's nose for the scent of vital organs. Elsewhere within the organism, teleport flares bloomed. Each arrival was a miniature catastrophe. The raw force of the translation ripped apart the immediate surroundings, pulverizing lesser bioforms and bursting organic conduits. In the wake of each teleport storm stood more Terminators, more Astartes, weapons already swinging. They did not shout, they did not chant. They waded into the nearest concentration of hostile forms in total silence, footfalls muffled upon flesh and slime. The only sounds were the harsh blurt of storm bolters on full automatic, the rising whine of chain weapons, and the wet, cracking thunder of combat between ceramite and chitin. Claws scraped along armor. Fanged maws snapped at plasteel. Bioacids hissed where they splashed across Terminator plate, eating at the outermost layers before seals and ceramite and layered right steel held firm. Takahurangi moved with his escort through a widened artery tunnel, mind half in reality, half immersed in the synaptic wash. The closer they came to the ship's core, the more the hive mind's pressure built, a constant grinding weight at the inside of his skull. Additional synapse nodes converging, he reported, at least one warrior gestalt, multiple beta-level controllers, unknown larger signatures beyond that. It is focusing eyes upon this ship, upon us. On the Nicor, pict feeds relayed back the war within the beast in glitch-laced, intermittent frames. Auspex overlays translated distances and flesh geometry into something the human eye could make sense of, wireframing the organic corridors into pseudo-architectural grids. Other displays showed the wider war. Out in the void, Imperial vessels that had survived the first exchange with the Swarm were committing to close assault. Cruisers and frigates, some bearing other chapters' colors, rammed themselves into drone ships and escort beasts, grapnels and mag clamps latching onto pulsing, chitinous hulls. The elegant ballet of void maneuver was over. The brawl had begun. Entire battle groups entangled themselves in writhing knots of bioships and steel, trusting their Astartes borders to decide the matter within. The Nicor's gunnery officers watched as one destroyer disappeared into the shadow of a Leviathan creature 3 times its length, its prow burying itself deep in the alien's flank. Explosions strobed along the contact zone. Tiny icons flickered across the augmented display, showing boarding actions underway, squads tunneling into the beast's interior, much as Tyberos and his Red Brethren did now. The hive ship sought to adapt. Capillary towers erupted from floor and ceiling, whipping up like meat pillars, seeking to pen the Terminators, to force them into narrower kill zones. They extruded from the walls in thickets, thorned growths gouging at ceramite, trying to impale and immobilize. Spore vents opened like gaping ulcers along the corridors, vomiting clouds of drifting motes. Those that settled on armor tried to burrow through, gnawing at seals and joints. The Carcharodons burned them away with disciplined gouts of promethium, the fire painting gruesome shadows along the organic surfaces. Where the hive ship thickened the air with choking vapors, helms sealed tighter, autosenses filtering out the worst of the assault. Tyberos carved his way through a forest of those towers, every sweep of hunger and slake severing trunks thicker than a man, turning them into collapsing heaps. The claws did not care what they met. Flesh, bone, tendon, chitin, capillary tubes full of glowing ichor, all were shredded without discrimination. The tunnels widened. The sense of space changed. The oppressive, throat-like corridors opened into something vaster, a cavity at the heart of the ship. Tyberos emerged through a torn aperture onto a raised platform of bone and hardened cartilage, overlooking a chamber that stretched far beyond the reach of his helm lamps. The air was full of chiming. Pillars rose from floor to ceiling, slender and irregular, each one thick with nodal clusters of nerve tissue. Bioelectric pulses flickered along them in cascades, setting off soft, crystalline notes as electrodes clicked and fired. It sounded eerily like a perverse cathedral bell choir, ringing out the patterns of synaptic communication. "Node chamber," Tyranids breathed over the vox, stepping up beside the Shade Lord. In the warp, the pressure was almost unbearable. Central synaptic relay. Cutting this will blind a portion of the swarm. Guarding it were warriors. Tyranid warrior forms, tall and sinuous, fanned out along the base of the pillars, their elongated skulls, and fanged maws marked with the stark white and deep purple of Leviathan. They moved with a horrific coordination, scything talons and biocannons raised as one. Behind them, carnifexes lurked, massive hunchbacked brutes, their shells ridged and pitted with organic artillery growths. Their tiny, hate-filled eyes burned like coals in their monstrous heads. Each step they took made the entire chamber tremble, thick legs cracking the floor. For a moment, there was stillness. Terminator plate hissed, bioweapons seethed, psychic power simmered unspent. Then the chamber detonated into violence. The first Carnifex charged, bellowing a low, subsonic roar that Sorev would later swear he felt even through the ship's hull, far above. It thundered toward the Carcharodons, its monstrous bulk scattering lesser creatures aside. Tyberos met it head-on. He moved faster than a thing that size had any right to. The Carnifex crashed down with enough force to shatter a tank, scything claws, stabbing. Tyberos slipped inside the arc of those killing limbs, his claws carving a cross-hatching of luminous wounds into its chest. The beast's momentum carried it past him, several hundred kilos of enraged biotank staggering, nerve signals disrupted. Hunger punched up beneath its throat, tearing through bone and spinal tissue. Slake smashed into one of its forelimbs, chain teeth chewing through the dense cartilage until the arm came away in a shower of splinters. The Carnifex crashed down, crippled, still trying to reach the Terminators with its remaining limbs. Tyberos planted one boot upon its head and drove both claws down, burying them until his gauntlets vanished into its torso. Stormlight and chain teeth turned whatever they touched into an unrecognizable mess. Around him, red brethren and warrior forms slammed together. Storm bolters hammered at close range, shells chewing into plated torsos. Scything talons punched through ceramite, snagging in flesh and cabling. The Terminators answered with crushing blows, power fists caving in chests, chain fists sawing limbs from bodies. The chiming of the nerve pillars rose in tempo, as if the chamber itself was screaming. Tyranids shut his eyes for a heartbeat and hurled his will into the nearest synapse creature. His staff crackled with contained power as he thrust it forward, the force blade biting into alien flesh, even as his mind stabbed at the creature's controlling intellect. The warrior shrieked, not with a vocal sound, but with a psychic burst that rippled through the chamber, staggering lesser gaunts and hybrids. "Target the nodes," he snapped, voice strained. "Bring the pillars down. Kill the synapse beasts first." The Red Brethren obeyed. Heavy weapons swung toward the chiming clusters. Crack charges were hurled, clamping onto nerve trunks before detonating. Where the blasts struck, whole segments of the network collapsed, pillars folding in on themselves, their lights guttering out. The hive ship convulsed. The chamber's walls flexed, the floor rippling beneath armored boots. Distantly, through the hull, there came the muffled echo of macro impacts as other Imperial ships hammered at the creature's outer shell. One by one, the synapse beasts fell. A warrior had its thorax caved in by a power hammer, fracturing its reinforced bones and sending it crashing into a pillar, snapping it at the base. Another was ripped open by a chain fist, the Terminator wielding it, twisting and sawing until the alien's screams were reduced to meaningless twitching. The last Carnifex reared up, half its carapace hanging in slabs where storm bolters and melters had bitten deep. It lunged toward Tyberos, jaws distending. He stepped into it, driving hunger and slake up through the soft palate and into the skull. The claw's lightning fields crackled, the chain mechanisms churning, turning the synaptic organ mass into slurry. The creature's legs buckled, dead, weight crashing down. As it fell, the chamber's chiming faltered and began to die. Takaharangi felt the psychic shock like a physical blow. The link that had carried command signals from this node to the surrounding swarm snapped. Out in the void, lesser organisms faltered, their behavior erratic. Distant hive ships, semi-autonomous but still reliant on the central relay, spasmed in their movements, trajectories wobbling. Charges, Tyberos voxed, already turning away from the ruin of the last synapse creature. Along the primary trunks, we gut this heart completely. The Red Brethren moved with brutal efficiency, planting melter charges along the thickest of the remaining nerve pillars. Takaharangi's auspex and psychic senses combined to identify the most vital trunks, the ones whose destruction would send shockwaves furthest through the synaptic lattice. Within minutes, the chamber looked as though a savage, ritualized surgery had taken place. Pillars hacked down, floors slick. Charges blinking a dull, malignant red. "Detonate on my mark," Tyberos said. He led the withdrawal, forcing his way back through the corridors they had mutilated on the way in. The hive ship shuddered around them, trying to seal wounds, to grow new tissues to compensate. It was too slow. Now. The melter charges went off. Down in the node chamber, fire hotter than Starcore ate through the remaining nerve trunks. The blast did not throw the ship apart. It did something worse. It burned away the delicate, infinitely complex connections that made this living continent into a coherent organ of the greater hive mind. On the Nikor's gun deck, Sorev saw it happen. The hive ship had been a looming shape on the void display, a swollen ovoid rimmed in smaller escort forms. Its armor had glowed with the pattern of impact marks and bioplasma scars. Then, in the span of a few breaths, its motion changed. It spasmed, it lurched, rolling like a stunned beast. Bioplasma lances that had been firing in a steady barrage suddenly flickered and died. Spore clouds vented uncontrolled, spilling precious biomass into the void. Whole sections of its surface swelled, then ruptured as internal regulation systems went mad, digesting where they should have fed, pumping where they should have contained. Internal detonation, someone breathed on the gun deck. The borders. They have cut its brain out. The Nikor's macro cannon went to work, pounding the stricken Leviathan with salvo after salvo, turning its stagger into a descent. Other ships in the flotilla joined in, hammering at the now disorganized beast. A vessel the size of a small moon began to die from the inside out. Back on the bridge, teleport flare spat Tyberos and a dozen surviving Red Brethren back onto the Nikor's plated floor. Teleport frost steamed from their armor. Alien fluids dripped from claws and greaves, hissing where they struck the sanctified deck. No one spoke. Servitors and mortals alike made the sign of the jaws across their chests as the Shade Lord strode through the fading haze toward the Strategium rail. Technomagi took one look at the state of the Terminator's armor and turned away to offer silent, fervent thanks to their machine spirits. Tyberos came to a halt before the hololithic display. The icon representing the hive ship they had just gutted flickered, then broke apart, its mass dispersing into a cloud of ruin markers. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though they had opened a gap in the swarm's front. Then the Auspex fully resolved the rest of the contact field. Red motes bloomed into existence far beyond the first wave. Dozens became scores, Scores became hundreds. Whole strata of the display lit up with new contacts, emerging from the dark behind the vanguard, rising up from the deeps like a second horizon of teeth. What they had killed was not the jaw. It had been one tooth among many. Takaharangi stepped up, beside the Shade Lord, gaze grim. "That was a vanguard element only," he said quietly. "A probing tongue of a greater tide. The true swarm is still coming. You have drawn blood from its lip, Tyberos. Nothing more." The Shade Lord studied the field in silence for a long moment. His helm hid his expression, but the set of his shoulders did not change. The weight of his claws did not shift. He had always known the scale of this enemy. To see it only confirmed what his instincts had already accepted. "Then we make it bleed again," he said. The air in the strategium tasted of hot metal and old incense. Cogitator banks muttered to themselves along the walls, spitting out streams of binharik in harsh little bursts. Servo skulls drifted in slow orbits through the dimness, parchment prayer strips fluttering from their frames. The hololithic projectors cast sickly light upward, pale green and red runes illuminating hanging chains of teeth and iron jaw relics. In the center of that void-lit gloom, a new image burned. It was not a tactical grid, not a clean schematic of ships and trajectories. It was a ragged composite of astropathic fragments and intercepted vox bursts, stitched together by machine spirits and librarian oversight into something resembling a picture. A world hung there. It was a shrine world, ringed in a faint corona of orbital debris and silent reliquary stations, its continents marked by scatterings of Gothic spires. A name flickered beneath it in high Gothic script: Piety 5. Takaharangi stood beneath the projection, his eyes reflecting its ghostly light. Around him, robed serfs held slates and stylus, ready to capture every word. Astropathic cipher scrolls lay rolled in a casket at his feet, some still faintly smoking from the stress of their reception. "This is the source," he said, voice low, carrying easily nonetheless. The choir has sifted and re-sifted the echoes. Piety 5, a shrine world in the outer marches, ostensibly loyal, sufficient population density, and ecclesiarchal infrastructure to be of note. He lifted a hand and the image shifted, zooming in upon one of the primary hives. It blossomed into focus as a forest of spires and bridges, reliquary towers rising like stone fangs from a sea of habstacks. Pontefrax, the capital. Even rendered in half-broken pict data, it had the unmistakable stamp of a world built to venerate. Every major thoroughfare was a processional route. Every plaza was a plaza of sainted bones. Pilgrimage arches were set at regular intervals, like vertebrae. From orbit, the arrangement of shrines and basilica might even have formed some devotional sigil, visible only to those with a god's eye view. Takaharangi's next gesture warped the image further, overlaying the visible with other spectra. Psychic flux burned across Pontefrax like foxfire. "There is a cult," he said, "calling itself the Star Saints. It has grown layer upon layer over the course of decades, perhaps centuries. Its roots now run from the highest tiers of the cathedral hierarchy down into the sump levels of the Hab labyrinths." Images flickered past, grainy picked captures taken from the eyes of dying Arbites. Frantic, blurred shots of processions gone wrong, robed figures carrying icons through streets choked with incense and chanting. At a glance, a viewer might have taken them for simple devotional crowds. At a second glance, the wrongness became clear. The saints depicted on the carried banners had more limbs than they should. Halos had grown tendrils. Some of the faithful had eye ridges that were too pronounced, teeth that were too sharp, postures that hinted at something inhuman in the arrangement of bone beneath the skin. "The cult is a brood," Takaharangi said. "Its priesthoods are magi. Its saints are broodlords and patriarchs. The Star Saints are of the gene-stealer kind. We have reports of whole PDF units who vanished into devotion. Administratum cadres who no longer tithe on schedule, yet continue to send hymnal recordings. The usual pattern, but magnified by the focus of a shrine world's massed belief. He closed his eyes for a moment. The Patriarch sits beneath Pontefrax, he went on, less as someone relaying information, and more as one describing something he could smell. Somewhere in the foundations of the primary cathedral, it has woven itself through the populace. They love it. They pray to it. They see in it the embodied saints of their devotion, come to lead them into a new age. Tyberos had not moved since the projection began. He stood at the strategium rail, helm removed and resting upon one of the iron spikes that ringed the display. His gaze was fixed on the world as it spun, the stark lines of his face unreadable. Takahurangi shifted the spectral view again. Around the psychic glow rising from Pontefrax, there appeared a second aura, faint but strengthening with every iteration of the data. Because they love it, the librarian said, because they pour their belief and hope and fanaticism into the cult, the Patriarch's psychic emission is amplified. It is not merely a synaptic node. It has become a beacon, a shrine torch in the warp. He stepped aside, and another hollow flickered into life beside Piety 5. It was the curve of the swarm. The Tyranid presence they had engaged in the deeps was there, a cluster of icons marked by an old engagement rune. But beyond it, stretching further into the black, more and more contacts glittered. Here, Tekahurangi said, indicating, a tendril, one jaw of something vaster. We do not know what name the High Lords or their savants will give this one, if they live long enough to name it. It does not care for names. It is of the same stock as Behemoth and Kraken. We call it Leviathan for now, for convenience. The tendril curved toward the galactic plane, its course previously a long, slow arc that would have taken it toward richer, denser portions of the Imperium in time. Then, at a certain point in that line, the trajectory shifted. The curve kinked, the tip altering its path fractionally, drawn by some newly brightened star, a living jaw turning. Piety 5's beacon is strong enough to tug at its course, Tekahurangi said. Not all of it, of course, not the whole beast, but a portion, a jaw, as you have said before, Shade Lord. A branch, heavy enough with biomass and intent to scour a subsector clean. It is rising toward the shrine world as we speak. The vanguard we bled was the advanced taste. Silence fell for a heartbeat. Mortals on the periphery of the strategium shifted uneasily. Casualty projections whispered through their minds. A shrine world consumed was not merely another loss of population and infrastructure. It was the loss of a symbol, the loss of belief. Those things mattered in the calculus of an already failing Imperium. Tyberos watched the slow turn of the swarm's projected line until it intersected the glowing halo around Piety 5. When he finally spoke, it was in that same soft rasp that always seemed out of place in a throat so scarred. How long? He asked. By void translation measure, Tekahurangi said. By the speed we have observed from prior hive fleets, and assuming no unforeseen warp turbulence. He let the bland calculations trail away. They were meaningless for the present. Soon enough that there is no time to summon other chapters in number, he said instead. Soon enough that any conventional battle fleet response will arrive too late to do more than record the world's death throes. We are here now. We are in its path. That is the only reason we have any choice at all. Tyberos's gaze slid from the world to the icons of his own fleet, tiny sparks arranged in a predatory formation between the swarm and Piety 5. What choice? He asked. Tekahurangi looked back up at the shrine world's image. You can let the cult call the beast in, he said. You can meet a full tendril of Leviathan in system orbit and bleed it, and die, perhaps, with some portion of its mass destroyed. Or you can cut out the lure on the surface and force the tendril to reconsider its course. Deny it that bait. Make it seek easier prey. The hololith reflected in Tyberos's pale eyes as a blur of green and red. A figure stepped forward from the circle of Astartes that ringed the strategium. Grey plate marked with campaign script, helm under one arm, features scarred and sun-darkened. The pauldron sigil of the Third Company stamped in stark white upon his shoulder. Baal Shah descended to one knee, head bowed. "Shade Lord," he said, "give me the Third. We will descend to Piety 5. We will excise this Star Saints brood and shatter their beacon. We will cut out the lure." Tyranids watched the captain, expression unreadable. The Third Company had already bled in the void against the vanguard swarm. To send them again into the heart of a cult-ruled shrine city was to throw already blooded meat back into the water. Tyberos's gaze shifted to Baal Shah. The captain did not flinch beneath it. His mouth was set in a hard line. His eyes were steady, as if he stood not in the heart of the chapter's fortress bark, but at the lip of a storm front he intended to stride into. "The cult has massed belief," Tyranids said quietly. "It has synaptic roots. It will not die easily. Every citizen of Piety 5 is a potential weapon in its hands. Every shrine and reliquary a fortification." "All the more reason to send us," Baal Shah replied, head still bowed. "We are suited to slaughter among the faithful." There was a bitter humor there, dry as bone. Tyberos let the words hang for a moment. The hum of the manifolds and the soft mechanical clicks of the strategium filled the pause. "Rise, Baal Shah," he said. The captain obeyed. "Take the Third," Tyberos told him. "Cut out the lure. I will break the teeth." The words were barely more than a whisper, but Baal Shah straightened as if a weight had been placed upon his shoulders. He bowed his head, helm clutched tight to his breastplate in brief acknowledgement, then turned and strode from the strategium with the measured haste of one who has long practice in walking with death. The hollow shifted again. Now the approaching swarm filled more of the projection space, tending away from abstraction and toward hideous detail. Bioships, each an organism the size of a city, glided forward in dense formation. Between them trailed capillary tendrils, reaching out like roots, tasting the void. Spore fields bloomed around them, so thick in places that they showed up as near-solid clouds, a drifting fog of latent murder. The machine spirits of the Nikor's Auspex tried to quantify them and failed. At a certain point, the numbers became meaningless. There were simply too many things moving together, too many individual bioforms woven into a single, living front. "Every cluster is a world's worth of biomass," one of the mortal tacticians muttered, not quite under his breath. "Every world it has already eaten written there in flesh, and it has eaten more than one." Casualty projections crawled along the lower edges of the display. They did not list ship counts or tonnage. They listed chapters, segmenta, whole swathes of the star map, colored in with the pallid shade the administratum used for depopulated zones. Tyberos ignored them. He had no interest in the math of fear. "Prepare the Third for atmospheric assault," he said. "All dropcraft, Thunderhawks, boarding claws, pods. We will fall upon Pontefrax in totality. We will not give the brood time to scatter." He turned his head, calling up a new sequence of runes with a curt gesture. "And signal the pact," he added. Tyranids' expression tightened. At the edge of the hololith, a different icon pulsed into being, marked not with a loyalist chapter's sigil, but with a jagged, half-erased heraldry, the Ashen Claws, once brothers, now something else, renegades who hunted their own way in the deeps, preying upon pirate fleets, heretic worlds, sometimes imperial shipping when it suited them. Between their fleet and the Carcharodons, there existed an old arrangement. an ancient pact of mutual aid in the worst of hunts, when prey too great for one predator alone rose from the void. To call upon it now was to invite censure if any eyes of the wider Imperium ever witnessed it. To fight alongside such outcasts further stained a ledger already thick with questionable acts. Takahurangi opened a private Vox channel, encrypting it before he spoke. "Shade Lord," he said softly, words meant for Tyberos alone. "The Ashen Claws will answer. They always have. But every time we fight beside them, the line between their path and ours blurs. There are those among the Lords of Terra who already question our methods. This will not lessen their unease." Tyberos did not look at him. "In the deeps," he said, "purity is an indulgence the prey cannot afford if it wishes to live." He made a sign with two clawed fingers, a command rune rather than a blessing. "Send the summons. They will come if they smell worthy slaughter. If they do not, then the pact is broken, and we will record that debt in blood when time permits." Tekahurangi inclined his head. He said nothing further. There was nothing more to say. The channel closed with a soft click. On the lower launch decks, the third company moved. Drop pods squatted in their cradles like eggs awaiting hatching, their surfaces marked with kill glyphs and shark jaw heraldry. Tech marines and serfs swarmed over them, checking clamps and seals, daubing last-minute wards of oil and blood upon their hulls. Thunderhawks rumbled as their engines cycled up, wings spread, bomb racks loaded. Their holds were already filling with grey-armored forms, squads strapping themselves into restraining harnesses, securing weapons. Baal Shar walked among them, helm on now, red-eye lenses scanning. He traded no jokes, offered no rousing speeches. His warriors needed none. They had fought long enough under his command to know what awaited them whenever they were told to board dropships. They knew they would be falling into streets choked with fanatics, into plazas turned into sacrificial pits, into basilicas where the sermons had become cult hymns to a Xenos god. They knew the air would be thick with incense and the smell of too many bodies packed together beneath towering statues. They also knew that this suited them. Baal Shar stopped beside one Thunderhawk as its ramp clanged up, sealing the last of the third aboard. He raised his gauntlet to the picked rune, acknowledging the pilot's voxlit request for departure. "Third company," he voxed across the assault net, his voice calm. "Piety 5, Pontefrax. The prey has built its own altar. We will turn it into a butcher's slab. No prisoners, no relics, no cathedra left standing. Sever the patriarch. Burn the brood." He paused. "Cut out the lure," he finished, echoing the Shade Lord's words. The Thunderhawks launched. They plunged from the Nikor's ventral bays like a shoal of steel-scaled predators, engines howling. Between them, drop pods fired from their clamps, their retros flaring as they adjusted trajectories. To the orbital picked feeds, the third company looked like a storm of falling teeth, grey streaks cutting down through atmosphere toward the gleam of pontifical spires. Piety. 5 grew in the viewports. Pontefrax's towers pierced the cloud layer like stone spears. Pilgrimage routes radiated from the central basilica, lined with statues and flanked by devotional arches. Anti-air fire rose from bastions along the Hive's rim, shells blooming into clusters of shrapnel, las flak streaking up in desperate ragged lines. Some of the guns were manned by what remained of the loyal PDF. Others had been turned by the Star Saints, their crews chanting alien hymns as they sought to tear the teeth from the sky. Thunderhawks bored through the incoming fire, void-hardened hulls shrugging off glancing hits. One took a full munitions strike to its port wing. It spiraled away in a smoke trail, disappearing behind a tower. Baal Shar watched its rune fade from the assault board and did not alter his course by a fraction. He saw, in the last flicker of data from the dying craft, the shadow of the cathedral at the Hive's heart. It loomed over the city, an edifice of black stone and gold trim, its many-tiered spires reaching high enough to almost brush the clouds. Beneath its foundations, the source of the beacon waited. Above, in the upper reaches of the piety system, the Nikor and her attendant. Warships shifted. They formed into a broad, loose bulwark between the shrine world and the advancing mass of Leviathan's tendril. It was no knightly shield wall. It was the curve of a predator's jaw, set to catch whatever teeth of the swarm reached this far inward. Crew captains along the flotilla whispered their casualty projections to one another in grim cant. They no longer spoke of losing this or that escort, of half their torpedo stocks expended. They spoke in terms of how many companies they expected to feed to the void, how many worlds worth of biomass they might be able to deny the swarm before being ground into paste. On one of the lesser Imperial cruisers, its hull still bearing the colors of some beleaguered segmentum fleet, a human admiral argued into his vox, face flushed, hands tight upon the arms of his command throne. "We can hold a line with you," he insisted. "My ships, the sector flotilla, we can add our weight. This is an Imperial shrine world, my lord. Its defense is our duty as much as yours." On the strategium of the Nikor, Tyberos regarded the man's image with the cold patience of a predator, looking at a fish that did not know it was already swallowed. "Your ships are made to die in orbit," he said softly. "Ours are made to die anywhere." The admiral blinked, taken aback. "You would have us run?" he demanded, some mix of outrage and disbelief. "I would have you live long enough to carry word," Tyberos replied. "Withdraw to the system's edge. When this is done, if any of us remain, you can add whatever embellishments you like to the tale you send to your lords." "The Munitorum will not favor cowardice," the admiral said, before he could stop himself. Tyberos's gaze did not harden. It never did. It simply remained what it was, flat and unblinking. "There is no cowardice in refusing to throw soft meat into a grinder built for boulder bone," he said. "Go. If you stay, you will be eaten and added to the sum of the beast. I will not waste biomass. I do not have to." The admiral's jaw worked. Somewhere beyond him, on his own bridge, officers watched with wide eyes. By your leave," he forced out at last. "You do not need my leave," Tyberos said. "You need your own spine. Use it." The channel cut. One by one, the icons of the local battle fleet peeled away from the bulwark line. They burned for the outer system, their wake lines thin against the mass of the swarm. Some captains hesitated, some did not. All went, drawn by the Shade Lord's ruthless logic as much as by the fear of being devoured. The Nikor remained, flanked by her hardened escort vessels. In the dark beyond, the first leading elements of the Leviathan tendril slid into real space. They were vast, their hulls fretted with gun symbiotes and feeder tendrils. Their arrival rippled the void, warp wake shimmering in bands of malign color. Bioplasma sacs swelled along, their flanks as they oriented upon the shrine world and the predator fleet between them and their prey. On the hololith, pale lines extended from the foremost of those hulks as their weapons came into range. "Incoming!" a mortal Auspex officer called out. "Bioplasma lances arming. Impact solutions. Now!" In the void, streaks of sickly, luminous energy reached out from the swarm. They crossed the black between stars in instants, carving glowing scars across the darkness. The first lances splashed across the Nikor's void shields, spilling strange, burning light over the ancient hull. Others raked the escorts, flaying armor from flanks, shearing away sensor masts, turning proud prows into molten slag. The opening salvo of a slow apocalypse had begun. Far below, through the roil of the world's atmosphere, Baal Shah's thunderhawks screamed toward Pontefrax, engines howling defiance as anti-air fire and falling spores began to stitch the sky into a killing field. Piety 5 screamed. The Thunderhawks and drop pods of the Third Company came down through the cloud layer in a howling pack, contrails scarring the sky over Pontefrax. Anti-air fire stitched upward in frantic lines from bastions and shrine spires, some shells the red of the Administratum, others a strange purple, retooled by alien hands. The air was full of falling things. Pods hit first. The impact shook whole streets. Marble cracked. Pilgrim statues toppled from plinths. Processional ways that had seen centuries of carefully choreographed marches became craters and fields of shattered stone as grey ceramite shells punched through stained glass and devotional mosaics alike. The first pod that struck the plaza of the Ascended Saint did so in the middle of a sermon. The crowd had been thousands strong, packed shoulder to shoulder beneath banners that bore the likenesses of their holiest figures. At a distance, the icons looked traditional. Close at hand, in the slow-motion instant, before the pod hit, the wrongness was clear. Saints with too many limbs, their halos sprouting tendrils, cherubs whose mouths opened sideways, figures haloed not in light, but in stylized crowns of chitin. The magus on the pulpit had arms upraised, voice raised in a fervent hymn that was not any recognized imperial litany. The words crawled along the air like things alive. The drop pod slammed into the plaza, drilling into the stones with a shriek of tortured marble. Shockwave and stone shards took the front ranks of the congregation off their feet, sending bodies tumbling. The pod's petals blew out. Grey ceramite shapes strode from the smoke, bolters already raised. The Aquila was absent from their armor. In its place ran the shark-jaw heraldry of the Carcharodons, rank glyphs scratched in crude personal marks across pauldrons and chest plates. They opened fire. Mass reactive shells tore through banners, flensing cloth and flesh alike. The blasphemous icons disintegrated, fragments of alien-wrought devotion spinning away in the wake of the rounds. The sound of chanting became the sound of bursting forms and panicked screaming. Across Pontefrax, along processional roads, and in market cloisters, atop reliquary plazas, and at the feet of colossal saint statues, it was the same. Pods and thunderhawks hit like surgical strikes, each one targeted by Baal Shah's order at known cult convergence points. The Carcharodons of the Third Company poured into the city in disciplined squads, weapons cycling with mechanical regularity, every burst of fire demolishing a knot of robed figures or knocking apart a block of freshly raised iconography. From the outside, it might have looked like a massacre. From the inside, it was an operation. Baal Shah walked at the spear tip of one of the primary assault thrusts, his boots crunching over spent casings and fragments of stained glass. His helm lenses took in flickering images of saints and martyrs as they were torn apart, eyes tracking the movement of cultists more than the destruction of art. He gave no speeches as he advanced, no battle cries. His commands were short. "Let them run!" he voxed to his squads as cultists broke from cover and fled screaming down side streets, shedding their false imperial robes to reveal the ridged bone and mottled skin beneath. "Do not chase. Bleed them. Do not break them." It went against the instinct of many warriors to see prey flee and not hound them down. The Carcharodons were not like many warriors. They rewrote instinct when it did not fit the hunt. Bolter fire snapped out, disciplined, cutting into the edges of the retreating masses, tearing out chunks, leaving gaps. The survivors surged around the missing, trampling them, driven into tighter channels by their own panic. Baal Shah watched this with a cold calculus. They wanted the cult to rise all at once. No scattered cautious cells skulking in sublevels. No long drawn-out campaign of whack and bleed. They wanted a single, catastrophic uprising, every hidden broodmother and implanted official driven into the open by the shock of the assault, racing to answer the Patriarch's call. They wanted the entire infection concentrated where it could be cauterized. Tikahurangi tasted that infection. He moved with a smaller cadre of brothers and mortal scouts through the underways of Pontefrax, beneath the streets where Baal Shah's main force herded crowds. His armor seemed to drink in the low light. Psychic wards etched along its pauldrons, glimmering as they reacted to the unseen currents shuddering through the rock. The Patriarch's will flowed down here in steady, pulsing waves, through layers of subhabs, where generations of the poor had lived and died beneath the shining basilica, through reliquary vaults, where bones once venerated as saintly now served as decorations for alien idols, through maintenance tunnels that had become pilgrimage paths for the initiated. Every mind touched by the Star Saints was a rune in a litany. The Patriarch sang its song through them without words: devotion, ecstasy, anticipation. The psychic emission rose through the city like heat shimmer, spearing into the sky, a column of luminous wrongness in the warp. Tekahurangi followed it with his inner eye, tracing it back through layers of stone and blood to the knot at its core. The Patriarch sits beneath the primary cathedral, he voxed, sending the words across to Baal Shah, even as his flesh mouth remained set in a grim line. It has wrapped itself around the old crypts. The faithful come to it, thinking they descend to venerate relics. They rise again as part of its brood. Then we cut, Baal Shah replied. His voice was steady, the faint wolfish distortion of his helm vox lending it a further inhuman edge. Draw them all to that place. Give them something to defend. Tekahurangi's squad came across a shrine niche where a local had died on their knees, hands still clasped. The saint above had once held an icon of the emperor. Now the statue's face had been chipped away and replaced with a crude, many-eyed mask, carved from what looked disturbingly like fused bone. The librarian gestured, and his warriors moved on. There was no time for disdain, no time for the small acts of ritual cleansing some chapters might have insisted on. The wound here was not one to be healed, it was one to be excised. They dragged captives from the flanks of the crowds. Not many, just enough. Magi in tattered vestments. Brood officers whose third arms had yet to sprout, their allegiance betrayed only by the too smooth way they navigated the chaos. One such magus found himself pinned to a broken column by a Carcharodon's gauntlet, his feet kicking as he tried to claw at the fingers crushing his throat. His eyes, slit-pupilled and fever-bright, did not show fear. They showed a hideous joy. "You are late," he hissed, voice wet with blood from a broken tooth. "The saints have climbed into the sky already. The beasts from the stars are coming. They have heard our songs, our long prayers. They will reshape all this into a new flesh paradise. No more walls, no more hunger, only the unity of the feast." Baal Shah stepped up, his bulk blotting out the light. He regarded the magus for a heartbeat, helm lenses impassive, then tilted his head slightly. "The only paradise awaiting you is in the bellies of your gods," he said. His tone was conversational, almost mild, and even that will be denied. He raised his bolt pistol and shot the magus once through the forehead. The body jerked, then slumped. The hand that had been clawing at the Carcharodon's gauntlet twitched, then went slack. The warrior let the corpse fall, indifferent to the way the cultist's blood splashed across his greaves. "Drive them toward the cathedral," Baal Shah voxed, turning away. "Break routes that do not lead. There. Collapse side avenues. Do not waste ammunition on those who are not in our path. We heard, brothers. We do not chase." The Carcharodons obeyed. They were unsentimental shepherds. Grenades brought down colonnades and archways, sealing off alternative routes. Melter bombs turned side streets into smoldering rubble, forcing fleeing cultists into narrower funnels. Loyalist PDF units that still held to their oaths were gathered up and pushed along with the tide, confused and terrified, given no chance to go to ground or attempt separate stands. The primary cathedral of Pontefrax loomed ahead. It was a mountain of black stone and gold, its many-tiered spires stabbing at the sky. Statues of saints ringed its flanks, each one taller than a titan, arms outstretched in perpetual blessing. The main nave doors were vast enough for a titan to stride through, embossed with scenes of imperial triumph. Those doors were open now. They gaped wide, inviting in the flood of humanity sweeping toward them. The Star Saints had prepared the place, Tyranids knew. It was more than a house of worship now. It was a focus, a point where the cult's devotion intersected with the Patriarch's will. Killing within its walls would thicken the psychic emissions. Fear would burn brighter there. Pain would ring louder, which was precisely why Baal Shah wanted the slaughter to happen inside. The Third Company fell back in measured stages, always toward the cathedral, forming and reforming firing lines along plazas and prayer steps, cutting down the front ranks of the oncoming mobs, then withdrawing before being enveloped. Around them, cultists howled hymns that merged the imperial creed with something else. They lifted icons from which hung bones and biometal. They raised rifles and stolen lasguns and crude melee weapons. Among them moved twisted shapes half hidden beneath robes, limbs too long, skulls oddly ridged, eyes reflecting a feral light. Loyalist PDF forces, what remained of them, clung to the Astartes like drowning men to flotsam. They fired where they were told, fell back when ordered, bleeding themselves out in the shadow of their supposed saviors. Inside the cathedral, the air was heavy with incense and dust. Grim statuary loomed along the walls, saints and primarchs and angels rendered in stone and gilt. Frescoes covered the ceiling, scenes of imperial victory in lurid color, now marred by splashes of blood and smoke scars. The Third Company took position along the nave, forming a ring of grey that shrank slowly toward the sanctum. Altars and pews became barricades. Relic plinths were tipped onto their sides to provide firing slits. What loyal clergy remained cowered behind these makeshift walls, clutching books and relics, eyes wide with a terror that had pushed past piety and into numb disbelief. They had thought the Astartes angels. Now they saw them for what they were, predators in the same ecosystem as the monsters that had grown in their midst. Chain blades revved, teeth chittering as they idled. Bolters clicked as fresh magazines slammed home. The ground was already slick with blood, where the first waves of cultists had breached the doors, only to be scythed down. The next waves came on undeterred. They poured through the great portal in a frenzy, trampling their own dead, climbing over one another to reach the ring of grey that held the sanctum. Many fired wildly as they ran, last bolts scoring the marble, autogun rounds pinging from ceramite. The Carcharodons answered with measured volleys. They did not spray into the masses. Each shot was placed. Heads vanished. Torsos snapped back. Limbs came off. The cultists died by the hundreds, then by the thousands, and still they came, driven by that shared, overriding will that bubbled up from beneath the cathedral. Even those loyalist soldiers who had faced war before felt their guts twist. They had never seen killing like this. Not this scale, not this cold. At the heart of the ring, Baal Shah moved like the core of a whetstone, every movement sharpening the surrounding violence. Where the line buckled, he was there, chainsword carving a clear space, bolt pistol flaring. "Hold," he voxed. "Let them break themselves. We are not a wall, we are a maw." As the bodies piled, the cult's advance slowed, not for lack of zeal, but for sheer physical obstruction. They climbed over the fallen, slipped in their own blood, clawed at discarded weapons. Some crawled toward the Astartes once their legs were gone, hands leaving smears across the floor. The air grew thicker, the psychic tension grew with it. Beneath the cathedral, something began to stir. Tyranids felt it in the bones of the world, the Patriarch's unease. So much blood, so much fear, all of it rising up through the stone like smoke, feeding its beacon. But there was something else, an edge of disruption, loss, confusion. parts of its broodline already severed by earlier kills, threads cut in the network. It did not understand. Not yet. But it was beginning to realize that something in its design had gone awry. In a chamber beneath the sanctum, far below the frescoed ceilings and stained glass, tech priests moved in hurried ritual. They had labored over the sealed sarcophagus for a full day, intoning activation cants, coaxing old machine spirits to wakefulness. Now the seals broke. Steam hissed from brass valves. Cogitator arrays flickered to life, lighting the cramped chamber with an unhealthy glow. The sarcophagus shook once, its ancient servos grinding as they remembered motion. Then the front plate unlocked and folded away, revealing the armored giant entombed within. The Contemptor's optics lit red. A voice like a cracked organ pipe filled the vault, spilling out through Vox grills as the ancient warrior came back to consciousness. "Where is the foe?" he roared, the words thick with time and static, couched in archaic, high Gothic. "Where are the faithless that dared to stir this shell?" Tech priests bowed low, chanting. They recited quick, clipped briefs as the sarcophagus-mounted mind linked with the cathedral's remaining sensorium. Images poured into the dreadnaught's awareness. The city, the breaches, the cult. He laughed, a grinding sound. "Then wake the guns," he said. "Let this place remember war." The Contemptor rose. It climbed from the vault like some metal revenant, its bulky form shaking dust from ancient stone as it forced its way up through access tunnels. Blocks groaned and shifted as it shouldered aside barriers never meant to be moved again. It reached the nave. The cathedral shook as the dreadnought strode into the ring, assault cannon mounted on one arm, already spinning up to speed, power fist flexing. Loyal mortals fell back instinctively, making room. Astartes shifted around it with minimal adjustment, making it the new anchor point of their line. The Contemptor surveyed the mass of cultists pressuring the entrance, the piles of dead, the icons of perverted saints. Its optics burned brighter. "In the name of him on terror," it intoned, vox booming. "In the name of the legion that was. In the name of the chapter that is." The assault cannon roared. A river of shells poured into the crowd, stitching a line of ruin through their ranks. Bodies came apart under the sheer volume of fire. Gaps punched into the press wide enough for Chainsword squads to surge forward and reap more. The power fist swung in slow, deliberate arcs, every blow swatting aside clusters of cultists, like insects, crushing them against pillars, driving them into the floor. Verses in ancient dialect rolled from the Contemptor's vox as it waded through the slaughter, half prayer and half kill litany. Few present understood all the words. The intent was clear enough. Above, the light dimmed. Distantly, beyond the cathedral's vaults, the sky over piety, 5, changed color. The first shadow of the Leviathan tendril fell across the world as its leading bioships entered the upper atmosphere. Their presence fouled the light, turning it a bruised, unhealthy hue even at midday. Spore clusters ruptured high overhead. They fell like diseased snow, streaks of burning matter and drifting clouds of corruption. The first vanguard organisms began to come down outside Pontefrax, hitting planes and smaller habs with enough force to pulverize buildings. The land beyond the city's walls shuddered as feeder tentacles punched into soil, drawing up the planet's strength to feed the swarm. Within the cathedral, the air grew colder as if in sympathy. Tikahurangi staggered, one hand going to his helm. He felt the change as a sudden surge in the background pressure. The Patriarch had felt the shadow fall across its world. It understood, with whatever served it as a brain, that its god was now close. The coming of the swarm lent it new fury. The same time, the severed links in its brood tugged at it like missing limbs. Rooms that should have held chanting congregations were empty. Officers that should have been eyes and ears were gone. Something was wrong. "Librarian," Baal Shah voxed. His armor was scarred, the shark jaw upon his pauldron streaked with soot and gore. "Report! We are close," Tika Harangi answered, teeth clenched. He felt the Patriarch's will roil. It is uneasy. It feels the blood and the fear and welcomes them, but it also feels the loss. It will not hide forever, not while its saints die above. "Then we keep dying," Baal Shah said. He ducked a wild last shot, Chainsword snapping out to take the shooter's arm. "Make it come to us. This position is unsustainable," Tika Harangi warned. He could hear the background chatter from company channels, the clipped reports of squad leaders. Ammunition counts dropping, armor breaches, casualties mounting among the mortal, auxiliaries especially. "We are bleeding at catastrophic rate." "That is why the Shade Lord chose this place," Baal Shah replied. "He trusts us to be the bait." He kicked a cultist from the barricade, bolt pistol barking into the man's chest as he fell. "We will not fail him." Silence met that statement for a heartbeat on the line. It was not doubt, it was acknowledgement. "Hold the ring," Tika Harangi said at last. "Make it look like the last stand it almost is. The Patriarch must believe this is where the world's fate is decided. Then it will come. I will feel its ascent and be ready." The librarian cut the channel and sank deeper into the psychic currents, bracing himself against the twin tides of the Patriarch's will and the distant, immense hunger of the approaching tendril. In the nave, Baal Shah reloaded. His armor was cracked along the breastplate where some heavy caliber shell had impacted. One of his vambraces was a ruin of fractured ceramite and exposed cabling. Smoke leaked from a rent in his backpack, where a glancing plasma hit had burned deep. He barely felt it. He could feel the cathedral trembling beneath the weight of bodies. He could hear the Contemptor's assault cannons cycling down to reload, the click of drums being changed, the hum of its reactor. He could smell blood and propellant and incense all braided together into a single cloying reek. Outside the barricades, cultists hammered with rifle stocks and blades, climbing over the mound of their dead, foaming and shrieking, eyes rolled back in devotional ecstasy. Baal Shah looked down the nave toward the great doors as they shuddered in their frames. "Shade Lord trusts we are the bait," he voxed, voice steady, transmitting not just to Tika Harangi now, but across the whole company net. "So let the beast bite." The tendril opened its jaws. From the Knicker's strategium, Piety 5 hung at the center of the display like an eye about to be closed. Around it, the Leviathan branch uncoiled in twin streams of bioships, their trajectories curving inwards from opposite vectors until they resembled closing fangs. Lesser swarms spilled ahead of them, a spray of smaller creatures and escort beasts rushing forward to meet the grey hulls that barred their way. The hololithic projection translated that living enormity into points of cold light. Tiny icons, color-coded and sigil-marked, drifted in slow dance. It did nothing to diminish the scale. The swarm's presence was not in the lights. It was in the way the Auspec's engines growled. It was in the way the deck vibrated underfoot, as the Nikor's own machine spirit flexed in answer. Tyberos watched without moving. The Nikor stood at the center of the Carcharodon's formation, her escorts fanned out around her in predatory arcs. Compared to the vast, organ-swollen hulks of the larger hive ships, they looked almost delicate, steel fish circling the flank of a breaching Leviathan. "Notice the lines," Tika Harangi murmured, standing at the Shade Lord's side. His eyes were hooded, his tone clinical. "It is not random. The tendril does not thrash. It flows." The librarian gestured, and faint arcs of light appeared between the leading bioships, showing lines of synaptic linkage. Together they formed a woven shape of nerve and flesh, a rough lattice that revealed something of the hidden mind binding the swarm. "Two primary streams," he said, each with its central synapse carriers. Lesser beasts clustered along their flanks, capillary tendrils and feeder vessels in the wake. The closing motion is deliberate. They intend to envelop us and the world together. On the main plot, the twin streams shifted closer around Piety 5, their projections intersecting beyond the world. A jaw closes not directly, but with room to crush. "Let them close," Tyberos said softly. He pointed with one clawed gauntlet, the motion causing a cascade of runes to flicker. "Bring the Nicor into the densest knot here," he ordered, "ahead of the midpoint. Drive us between the two streams where they have bunched their carriers. The escorts will adjust around us. We will take the main brunt." An echo of unease ran through the mortal elements on the bridge, like a wind through tall grass. No one spoke against the order aloud. The Nicor's machine spirit accepted it with a hungry rumble. Thrusters fired along the Warbark's flanks, vast engines biting into the void, altering its course. As the Predator moved, the school followed. Small, hard Carcharodon craft swung into new positions, lances and macro batteries realigning. A few non-chapter vessels, stragglers from the displaced local flotilla unable or unwilling to leave, remained, hugging closer to the Nicor's bulk, as if proximity to that ancient monster might somehow spare them. The swarm reacted. The foremost of the hive ships altered their own vectors, swelling. Plasma sacs along their flanks. Their lesser escorts darted forward, lining their own bioweapons along new trajectories. On the display, warning runes flashed. "Incoming bioplasma lances," a mortal Auspex officer announced, voice tight. "Multiple firing sources. Impact in..." He cut himself off. Numbers were meaningless at these speeds. Impact was simply imminent. In the void beyond the Strategium's thick adamantium view shutters, the first lances leapt. They were not beams of coherent light, not in any sense human technology understood. They were jets of superheated, mutagenic matter propelled at laughable velocities, leaving trails of malignant luminescence in the dark. The Nicor met them head-on. Void shields flared, domes of invisible force lighting up in the spectrum of incandescence as the bioplasma crashed against them. The Warbark's ancient generators howled, bleeding power from across the ship to feed the hungry walls that kept the lethal tide at bay. Some lances found lesser prey. An escort cruiser on the Nicor's starboard flank took a direct strike square across its prow. Armor melted and ran like wax. The ship's void shields failed in a single flicker, stripped away. A second lance followed the first, punching through to the core, turning the proud vessel into a blooming cloud of evaporated metal and fleeting flame. Other escorts died similarly, icons winking out on the display as their hulls were torn open, their atmospheres and crews spilling into the void, to be frozen and forgotten. "Maintain advance," Tyberos said. The Nicor pushed forward. Where other commanders might have turned aside to lessen the kill zone, Tyberos drove his Warbark into the thickest cluster of enemy fire, trusting in the brute resilience of its hull. The ancient plates had known the touch of stellar storms and traitor guns. They would now know the heat of the great Devourer's spit. Each hit that splashed across the Nicor's shields was a blow that did not land on an escort. Each gust of bioacid that slammed into her hull without penetrating was a splash that did not flense a smaller ship to the bone. The Warbark absorbed hatred as a matter of principle. "Launch all boarding torpedoes," Tyberos voxed. "Sequential waves, primary target profile, mid-size synapse carriers. Secondary, escort beasts with high node density. Each torpedo is a tooth. Sink them deep." "Shade Lord," one of the mortal shipmasters ventured from his pit below, unable to stop himself. His voice had the ragged edge of a man watching his carefully kept vessels being thrown into a meat storm. "At this range, with shields taking such stress, we risk catastrophic failure. If their bioweapons breach, if we suffer multiple penetrations, the Nicor herself could be..." He could not quite bring himself to say it. Tyberos looked down at the man. His helm's lenses were empty black. No light caught in them, no expression, showed beyond the faint crackle of static around their edges. "The swarm does not fear death," he said quietly. "Why should we?" He cut the Vox without waiting for an answer. The order stood. Along the Nikor's flanks, launch bays belched steel. Boarding torpedoes streaked from their clamps, engines flaring as they burned toward the nearest hulks. They flew low across the skin of the void, some weaving around incoming organic munitions, others simply ramming through, using the impact to adjust course. Teleport flares blossomed in the darkness as strike teams were hurled across the Gulf without the need for physical shells. Drop pods designed for void breaching fired in tight sequence, targeting the softer vent zones of the bioship's hulls. Tyberos was not trying to save his escort craft. He was trying to bury as many Carcharodons as possible inside the swarm before the makeshift line broke. Each squad, each Terminator, each assault group that made it into the guts of a hive ship was a wound inflicted from within, a blade turned in the softest tissues. If the escorts died, they died doing what they existed to do, putting teeth into the prey. On Piety 5, the sky had turned sick. The shadow of the tendril thickened above the world as more and more of its mass slid into real space. The edges of the swarm's presence were still far, but its leading elements had already begun to feed. Outside Pontefrax, along the Lesser Hab Ring, and in the rural settlements beyond, the first Tyranid vanguard creatures erupted from their spore pods. Their landing zones were craters of fused glass and churned earth, stinking of chemicals and alien birth fluids. Hormagaunts and termagants poured out in chittering waves, racing across fields and into township streets. They met what remained of the planetary defense forces in frantic, fractured engagements amid burning structures and fleeing civilians. It did not matter who wore what color. Human voices screamed, both litanies and cult hymns.
Support the channel, like, comment, subscribe. I would highly appreciate it. And let's get back into it.
One regiment, still loyal to the Imperium, fought a rearguard action along a rail yard, laser guns cracking, heavy bolters thudding from behind stacked cargo crates. The cultists they had been dueling a day earlier broke from cover in fanatical joy when they saw the sky beasts fall, charging out to join what they believed would be their salvation. The Tyranids ate both with equal enthusiasm. Gaunts scythed through mixed lines, their claws uncaring of tattoos or devotional brands. Rippers flooded from burst cysts, rivers of pale eel-like bodies surging through gutters and drainage channels, stripping anything they engulfed down to bone. Screams did not even have time to rise properly before being choked off. Where cult cells tried to hail the newcomers as saints, they were simply cut down faster, their open arms presenting less resistance than raised weapons would have. The Great Devourer did not do gratitude. It did not reward faith. It consumed. Inside, Pontefrax's cathedral, the last stand of the Third Company, reached its final grinding phase. Ammunition counters ticked toward 0. Bolters clicked on empty chambers more often. Chains wards juddered as their teeth hit fracture points, machine spirits howling with abuse. Armor that had already been cracked and burned now hung together mostly by will and ceramite habit. Every step back was deliberate. Baal-Shah folded his line inward with surgical precision, giving ground a little at a time, never collapsing, never running. Each withdrawal brought the cult and the scared survivors closer, tightening the circle around the sanctum. He knew what Tekohurangi needed. Blood, fear, desperation. All of it focused here, in this one place, where the Patriarch could not ignore it. The Carcharodons fought with that in mind. They did not seek swift kills. They inflicted obvious ones. A chains word taken through a torso, in a way that sent a fan of blood into the air, a bolt round, detonated not in the head, but in a limb, sending the victim spinning and screaming. Scenes the Patriarch, under the cathedral, could taste through the constant link it had with its brood. The psychic profile of the place sharpened into a dagger. Baal Shah felt none of this directly. He felt only the weight of his chainsword, the grind of his damaged pauldron when he lifted his arm. He saw his brothers staggering, servo systems failing, one by one falling to their knees as cultists clambered over the barricades and were thrown back in rapid, brutal counterstrikes. Above, the Contemptor's assault cannon was down to short, controlled bursts, each shot selected. Its power fist was dented, fingers bent, but still rose and fell in implacable arcs, smashing lines of attackers like wheat under a threshing bar. The air in the nave was thick enough to taste, sour with cordite, cloying with the iron stink of blood, laced with incense that had never been meant to mix with such a reek. Far above all that noise and heat, aboard the Nikor, Te Kahurangi stood amid a ring of hollow displays and closed his eyes. He had been recalled from the cathedral by teleport not long after the swarm's full shadow fell, the Shade Lord tearing him from the planet's surface so that his mind might be better used at this level of the hunt. The pattern laid beneath Pontefrax clung to him still, but now he reached wider. "Link," he murmured to the librarians scattered across the battle. Voices answered across the warp. Some came from Terminator squads deep inside lesser hive ships, their bearers half submerged in synaptic environments of pulsing walls and nerve forests. Others drifted in from scout psychers stationed on the outer hull of the Nikor, their senses extended into the void like antennae. A few came from Carcharodon vessels now grievously wounded, their librarians clinging to consciousness as their ships burned. Each carried a slice of the hive mind's presence. Kahurangi drew those slices together. In his inner sight, the swarm's synaptic lattice became clearer. Lines of force, currents of intent. Each destroyed node they had already inflicted left a gap, a frayed end that helped highlight the remaining structure. It resembled some immense alien beast in motion, a wyvern made of thoughts and hunger, its spinal cord the core of the tendril, its limbs the branches of lesser synapse chains that extended into individual hive ships and spawned organisms. "There," one of the distant voices breathed, the words tight with strain. "A node cluster heavier than the rest, massed control impulses. It is not at the very front. It rides among the central carriers." Te Kahurangi saw it, a concentration of synaptic threads thicker than the others, a knot at the heart of the twin streams junction. A command-grade synapse carrier, larger, more complex, its internal brain mass swollen with the task of coordinating a vast portion of the tendril. "Mark," he said. Runes flickered along the strategium display as cogitators translated the psychic designation into spatial coordinates. A larger icon pulsed amid the swarm, haloed. Tyberos's gaze locked onto it instantly. "That one," he said. He did not ask if it was certain. Te Kahurangi's answer was in the way his skin crawled and his eyelids fluttered. "Yes," the librarian said. "If we tear out that cluster, the shock will ripple through this whole branch. It will not kill the tendril, but it will wound it. It will make it clumsy. It may turn it aside." "It will bleed," Tyberos said. He turned away from the rail. "Red Brethren," he voxed across the ship. "All surviving suits, all claws, to the teleportarium. We have cut lesser nerves. Now we take the spinal cord." He left the rest of the fleet to their work. The escorts fought on, guns hammering, hulls cracking under sustained bioweapon impact. They had their own captains, their own duties. Tyberos trusted them to continue dying in ways that served the plan. The teleportarium thrummed. Its rings glowed with gathering power, runes burning along their edges. Tech adepts moved with an urgency that bordered on panic as they recalibrated for a target, unlike any they had yet attempted to pierce. The synapse carrier was larger than the previous hive ship they had boarded, its internal geometry more complex, its flesh walls layered with more dangerous adaptive tissues. The teleport coordinates fuzzed and shifted as they tried to lock onto something stable amid all that living motion. The Red Brethren assembled regardless. There were fewer now. The teleport platforms had once accommodated full squads in wide arcs. Now there were gaps between the Terminator suits, spaces where warriors had fallen in earlier engagements and had not been replaced. Those who remained bore fresh scars, acid burns and claw marks over older rituals. Tyberos stepped into their midst, hunger and slake humming softly. "Silent," he said. There was no need to remind them. It was habit engraved in bone. Tekahurangi entered the chamber, warding seals shedding flakes of dried blood as they reacted to the teleportarium's energies. "I will guide," he said, staff butt ringing on the deck. "The hive mind knows we are here, but it thinks us still scattered among the lesser beasts. We will strike at its core from the blind side of its own arrogance." Tyberos inclined his helm once. "Do it." The capacitors screamed. Light flared, cold and savage. For a heartbeat, the world shredded into sensation. Then the Red Brethren arrived. They materialized into a vast theatric of living architecture. The atrium that greeted them stretched beyond their vision, a cavern in the heart of the synapse carrier where scale had lost all meaning. Bone arches towered overhead, interlocking into a grotesque lattice. Beneath them, rivers of biofluids coursed along channels, of gristle and cartilage, glowing faintly with bioluminescent organisms. Bridges of calcified tissue spanned those rivers, their surfaces slick with mucus films. Organ clusters pulsed along the walls, inflating and deflating in time with some colossal heartbeat that vibrated up through the floor. The hive ship did not react with confusion this time. It had been waiting. Guardian beasts surged forward along the nearest bridges and platforms. Tyrant Guard lumbered into view, their heavy armor plated over already formidable frames, bone shields raised, lash whips snapping. Warrior forms moved beside and behind them, synaptic nodules along their spines glowing brighter as they directed lesser creatures. Other things came too, rare and specialized. Chitinous monsters swollen with extra lobes of synaptic tissue, grotesque walking brains wrapped in barding and claws. The Tyranids did not roar. They did not waste sound. They simply came on, a wall of instruments assembled to play the single note of murder. The Carcharodons met them without a word. Storm bolters spat, the heavy guns booming in the enclosed space. Shells tore into the leading Tyrant Guard, cracking the edges of their bone shields, punching cratered holes into carapaces. It slowed them. It did not stop them. They hit the Terminator line like a tide of chitin and rage. A Tyrant Guard swung its living shield in a sweeping blow, knocking one Terminator from his feet, sending him crashing back into a bone column. Before it could follow up, a chain fist whined, biting through the lower half of its shield with a spray of fragments, chopping into the limb behind. Tyberos drove forward at the center. He moved faster than anything so massive should, boots thudding on the bone bridge as he closed with the foremost of the Guardians. Hunger slashed out, the lightning claw shearing through a raised shield as if it were paper, talons punching into the flesh beneath and chewing, tearing the limb apart. Slake followed, ripping across the creature's throat, severing the thick vertebrae there. The Tyranid dropped, its massive body collapsing halfway into the glowing river below. Fluids mixing. Another hulking Guardian came in from the flank, scything talons descending. Tyberos ducked under the first stroke, the second scraping sparks from his shoulder plate. His counterattack was a blur, both claws carving deep trenches along its flank, cutting through the nodes that fed commands down its limbs. It stumbled, motion suddenly jittering. A Terminator at Tyberos's right took advantage, smashing a power hammer into the beast's side, sending it tumbling off the bridge entirely. It vanished into the churning currents below, crushed and digested by the ship's own circulatory system. The atrium became a nightmare ballet. Red Brethren and Guardian creatures intertwined in a series of brutal, efficient exchanges. each contact a microcosm of lethal intent. Chain blades shrieked as they bit into carapace. Bioplasma blasts spat from warrior cannons, splashing across plate, eating at ceramite, burning through weaker joints. Where a Terminator fell, he did so amid a ring of butchered aliens, his body becoming an obstacle the next wave had to clamber over. Tekahurangi stood back from the immediate crush, staff raised, mind turned upward. He could feel the synaptic density here like pressure in his teeth. The nerve core of this ship was near, behind the skeletal arches and pulsing organ swaths. Every kill, every movement of the fight echoed through that core, carrying back impressions to the greater hive mind. "We are close," he hissed, voice tight. "Follow the thicker currents. The nerve core is ahead, behind that central wall." The wall he indicated was not stone. It was a massive curtain of tissue, veined and ridged, from which protruded bundles of spinal ganglia as thick as ancient tree trunks. They ran upward into the structure above and downward into the depths below, carrying command impulses to and from the spread of the tendril. It pulsed faintly, like a heart behind a ribcage. Tyberos carved toward it, killing whatever dared interpose itself between him and that swollen nerve center. Far below, on Piety 5, the Patriarch finally began to rise from its nest beneath the cathedral, drawn by the knife edge of killing above. In the nave, Baal Shah stood amid wreckage and corpses, armor cracked and smoking, and stared down the main aisle as the first hints of its shadow bloomed among the tide of cultists. In the atrium, Tyberos came to a halt before the pulsing wall of ganglia, his claws dripping and humming, helm lenses locked on the place where Leviathan's local mind pulsed closest to the mortal realm. Two predators, on ground and in void, closing their jaws upon the vital organs of the same monstrous body. The thing that the cult called Saint came at last. It moved down the blood-slick nave on a tide of its oldest brood, borne forward less by its own limbs than by the crush of bodies around it. Robed hybrids and pure strains clung to columns and frescoed walls as it passed. Eyes rolled back in ecstasy, mouths distended in shrieks that merged into a single, ragged roar. The Patriarch was huge. Its swollen, pallid bulk was hunched, limbs jointed wrong, in ways that hurt the eye. The tattered remains of ceremonial robes still clung to its shoulders, stained and slicked to the chitin beneath. Its carapace had the glossy sheen of a thing grown fat on generations of stolen flesh. Its skull was an obscene crown of ridged bone and glistening sensory nodules, a mockery of the haloed icons that lined the cathedral walls. Where it passed, the air thickened. Its mind pressed ahead of it, an invisible front of thought and hunger. It washed over the defenders in a wave, a tidal crash of fanatic exultation and alien appetite. Mortal soldiers went to their knees as it hit, clutching at their heads, sobs and laughter tearing from their throats in the same breath. Loyalist priests coughed blood and fell, their eyes suddenly too full of stars. Even the Astartes felt it. Baal Shah's helm lenses clouded for a heartbeat. He tasted copper as blood burst in the fine vessels of his nose. His auto-senses read brief spikes in heart rate and neural activity across every brother in the line. Their firing faltered, not from fear, but from sheer psychic concussion. The Contemptor staggered, one massive foot slipping a fraction in the gore. It recovered with grinding effort, reactor growling, sarcophagus-bound mind rallying through the fog with a belligerent bellow of high Gothic that sounded like a curse hurled at the sky. The Patriarch drank all of that in as it advanced. Every eye turned toward it was a mirror, every thought of it a votive offering. It fed on their terror and awe, letting it roll back along the link it had woven, out through the city and into the warp, where it flared like a beacon. Tekahurangi stepped forward through the Kar-Charadon's line. Sigils of warding blazed along his armor, etched scripts flaring briefly as they reacted to the psychic pressure. The librarian's vox grill was bare, his helm removed and carried at his belt, the better to focus his will and voice. His skin was pale beneath the cathedral's dim light, fine cracks of fatigue showing at the corners of his eyes, but his gaze was steady. He planted his staff upon the blood-smeared stones with a ringing crack and spoke in High Gothic, his voice carrying with the force of an ancient and formal proclamation. "False saint," he called, every syllable carved and precise. "Impostor of the throne, leech upon faith, hear me. Your time of feeding is ended." The words were not theology. He was not trying to convince it of anything. The language was bait. The formality and rhythm were hooks, anchoring the creature's attention, tying it to him. "Within these walls," he went on, "no name is greater than that of the master of mankind, and you are not he. You are a parasite in borrowed vestments. I name you condemned. I name you nothing." The patriarch halted for the first time since it had entered the nave. It reared up, folding its bulk upon rear limbs in a grotesque parody of regal posture, its head tilted, forearms spreading, claws flexing. From behind its fleshy cowl, its eyes fixed upon Takahurangi. Its reply was not made with a mouth. Hate and hunger crashed into the librarian's mind with the force of a meteor strike. Images rammed through his thoughts, worlds stripped to cracked rock, seas turned to scummed mud, sky dark with spore clouds, cities like Pontefract sinking into mats of writhing biomass. A joy that had nothing human in it, the joy of perfect obliteration. The sound came a heartbeat later. The psychic scream manifested in real space as an inhuman bellow that did strange things to the air. Stained glass windows along the nave's flanks shattered inward, shards raining down in glittering curtains. The frescoed ceiling cracked in long, jagged lines. Mortal ears ruptured. Men clapped hands to the sides of their heads and collapsed, blood seeping between their fingers. Takahurangi's wards flared, taking the brunt. He took a step back despite himself, teeth bared in a snarl. The scream clawed at his thoughts, trying to rip away the careful structures he had built, to tear open his mind and pour itself in. He answered. The duel became both movement and stillness. The patriarch surged forward physically, its forelimbs slamming down, claws sending cracks spidering through the floor. It was faster than something that size should have been, its weight supported by a lifetime of stolen muscle and bone. Its leading arms scythed out at Takahurangi, claws long enough to scissor a man in half. The librarian met the first blow with the iron-shod haft of his staff. The impact jarred up his arms, shuddering, through ceramite and bone. His boots skidded in the slick mess underfoot. He pivoted, letting the force of the strike carry past him, twisting to drive the force blade at the staff's tip, up toward the creature's exposed underlimb. He did not aim for flesh alone. As the blade bit, he thrust his will along it like a spear. In the immaterial plane, his mind manifested as a grinding weight, a crushing tide of denial and silent abyssal depth learned in the deeps under the Astronomican's fading gaze. He applied it to the patriarch's presence like a vice, seeking not to destroy it in a single shattering blow. That was beyond even him, but to force open a gap in its connection. He needed a hole. If he could pry apart the link between the patriarch's mind and the synaptic threads that bound it to the greater Leviathan awareness above, he could weaken the beacon, unravel its song. The patriarch clawed back. In the warp, it was a nightmare of teeth and grasping limbs, a towering thing whose edges were made of screaming saint faces and chitin blades. It latched onto Takahurangi's mental form with far more limbs than reality admitted it possessed. It tried to drag him under, to drown him in its own ecstatic surrender to the great devourer. The real knave echoed that struggle. Baal Shah held the flanks. He ordered his brothers in short, curt bursts, positioning them not to break the patriarch's charge, but to block any lesser cultist or hybrid that tried to reach the dueling pair. He understood instinctively that this was no brawl. It was a surgical cut. Squads anchored on pillars and collapsed pews, forming kill zones that intersected and overlapped. They fired in tight arcs, bolt rounds chewing through the followers streaming in behind their saint, cutting down living ladders of bodies that might otherwise have swarmed around the librarian. The Contemptor waded deeper into the press. Its assault cannon spat a constant stream of spent shells, barrel-haloed in heat shimmer. Anything that got close enough to touch its scarred armor was ground beneath the brutal sweeps of its power fist, turned into a ruin that barely resembled flesh. It was not elegance, it was not artistry, it was erasure. "None pass," the ancient warrior thundered, vox booming in a mixture of battle tongue and old, half-remembered chants. None touch the duelists, by iron and by oath. Cultists flung themselves against the dreadnought's bulk, some too crazed to even hold weapons properly. They died in heaps, crushed and shot, their bodies adding to the ever-growing barricade of the dead that ringed the Carcharodon's shrinking redoubt. Up in the void, the hive ship felt the strain. The synapse carrier's nerve core flared in time with the Patriarch's exertions. Each psychic lash the creature sent through the warp echoed back along the spinal ganglia Tyberos now faced, manifesting as spikes of bioelectric activity. The walls around the Red Brethren clenched, tissue swelling and contracting in defensive spasms. Sacks along the ceiling convulsed, disgorging fresh warrior forms and specialist beasts, their gestation accelerated past sanity by the pressure of need. Rivulets of biofluids changed course, rushing in thick torrents to feed the nerve bundles at the chamber's center. The atrium shook, rifts opened in the bone bridges, chasms spreading where floor tissue tore under the strain. The Carcharodons adjusted without comment, Terminators shifting formation, stepping back from collapsing edges, using falling guardian carcasses as temporary cover. Takaharangi felt all of it. The librarian net hummed in his head, even as he wrestled the Patriarch in the cathedral below. Through the half-linked minds of his brother psychers scattered among the swarm, he sensed the nerve core's responses, as if they were the creature's second heartbeat. Over that net, he gasped a warning. "Shade Lord," he forced. Out, words ragged in more than one realm. "The beast is in two places at once. It lives in the Patriarch. It lives in the core. Each feeds the other." Tyberos's answer came back as a flat, cold growl. "Then kill your half," he said. "I will butcher mine." He surged forward. Hunger and Slake ripped into the nearest cluster of spinal ganglia, their blades and chain mouths chewing through layers of protective tissue. Reactive membranes tried to harden against them, calcifying in an instant, but the claws tore through, their lightning fields crackling, burning, forcing the way. The nerve core squirmed. Psychic feedback screamed down its length. In the cathedral, the Patriarch jerked, its massive bulk shuddering as pain it had never anticipated bit into the very structure of its connection. Takaharangi felt the momentary falter. He took it. With a wordless bellow that tore his own throat ragged, he drove his staff in again, not at the creature's limbs this time, but at the cluster of sensory organs along its skull. The force blade bit at an angle through a shield of bone, sliding between ridges, seeking the pulsing mass beneath where the Patriarch's primary brain cluster squatted. He poured his will along it in one focused spike, no longer trying to pry apart connections, but to puncture the core itself. The Patriarch's claws closed around him in that instant. In the physical, one of its forelimbs smashed into his chest, sending him skidding back across the nave, armor shrieking against stone. Claws dug into ceramite, scoring it, threatening to punch through into the flesh beneath. In the warp, its many-faceted hate bit into his mental form, a howl of pure destructive intent flooding his senses. He did not stop. The staff completed its thrust. The force weapon's power detonated inside the creature's skull in a focused burst, shearing through neural pathways, rupturing the psionic organ mass that served as the Patriarch's mind, anchor. For a fractional slice of time, there was nothing in Tekahurangi's world but light and pressure, a blinding, deafening discharge of energy. Then the shockwave rolled out. In the cathedral, the Patriarch stiffened, its limbs locking. A sound tore itself from its maw, a hybrid of scream and gurgle that shook dust from the rafters. Its eyes, all of them, flared and then went utterly dark. The psychic beacon it had been radiating shattered like a glass column struck with a hammer. The wave of its death scream went out through the cult's minds, a radiating ring of psychic shrapnel. Every brood member linked to it, every hybrid, every enthralled human whose faith it had drunk, felt the rupture. They convulsed. In the nave, cultists dropped where they stood, clutching at their heads. Some thrashed on the blood-slick floor, limbs jerking in uncoordinated spasms. Others simply went limp, their minds burnt out like fuses, their eyes staring at nothing. A few clawed at their own faces, trying to rip out the sudden, wrenching void where a god's presence had been. Above, across Pontefrax and out into the wider sprawl of Piety 5, the same thing happened. In hab tunnels and shrine crypts, in barracks and hidden meeting cells, the Star Saints' organized devotion dissolved into chaos. Voices that had been singing in psychic unison were ripped out of their chorus mid-note. The beacon's coherent signal was gone. In the Hive ship's core, the nerve center spasmed as the other half of that link was torn open from within. Tyberos howled wordlessly as hunger and slake found the synaptic heart. It was not an organ in the human sense. It was a mass of biocrystals and nerve cords woven together, grown into a brain that was not quite living tissue and not quite mineral, straddling the line between both. The claws bit into it, lightning fields crackling violently, chain teeth grinding through brittle plates. Tyberos's armor shook with the recoil as he levered and ripped, tearing the synaptic core out of its cradle. The nerve cords that bound it stretched, snapped, flailed like severed tendrils. The whole chamber reacted like a wounded animal. Walls contracted in panicked spasms. Bridges cracked. Rivers of biofluid surged wild, overflowing their channels, flooding lower sections. Creatures still standing staggered, their limb movements becoming jerky, uncoordinated. Tyberos held aloft the riven mass for a heartbeat. Then he brought hunger and slake together, crushing. The synaptic core shattered between his claws, fragments of crystal and torn nerve pulp cascading down. The aura of psychic authority it had radiated winked out, leaving behind only the background roar of distant greater minds too far to directly control this vessel without mediation. In the void, the synapse carrier convulsed. From outside, the Hive ship's motion changed. It rolled, a sluggish, wounded twist of its immense body. Bioplasma lances that had been firing in disciplined sequence fired wild, some spearing into empty space, others lashing across the flanks of neighboring Tyranid vessels. All along the tendril, other bioships stuttered. It was not as dramatic a change as the death of the Patriarch below, but it was significant. Those parts of the swarm that had relied on this particular carrier to coordinate their actions suddenly had to reroute through longer, clumsier paths. Commands took longer to travel. Reactions slowed by invaluable moments. On Piety 5, the collapse of the cult's mind was sudden and absolute. Baelshar watched as the frenzy in the eyes of the nearest cultists dimmed, their faces slackening. What had been a press of bodies at the barricades turned, almost in an instant, into a seething mess of confused, aimless movement. Some followers dropped their weapons, gazing around in vacant horror as they saw the cathedral truly for the first time, its walls painted in the blood of neighbors and kin. Others continued to babble fragments of hymns, the words falling apart in their mouths. The Carcharodons did not hesitate. They shifted in unison from holding action to cull. Bolters fired in precise, measured bursts, cutting down those closest first, working outward. Chainswords rose and fell in relentless rhythm. It was no longer battle. There was no threat. It was extermination. They felt no satisfaction, only completion. The Contemptor moved among the twitching bodies like a grim steel reaper, stamping on those who still writhed, crushing them to stillness. Its assault cannon spun down at last, barrel smoking, ammunition expended. "Clear the nave," Baal Shah voxed, voice flat. "No living cultist leaves this place. Any who throw down arms die more quickly, that is all." Takahurangi sagged where he stood. Blood leaked from his nostrils in steady tracks, dripping from his chin. A fine crimson film veiled his eyes. Tears of blood welling from capillaries burst by. Internal pressure. His staff shook slightly in his grip. He forced himself upright. Across the librarian net, the voices of his brothers were hoarse, exhausted, but present. They reported similar shocks, rippling through the swarm, similar stutters and gaps in the synaptic pattern. Slowly, painfully, he lifted his gaze to the heavens, through stone and atmosphere and void. On the Nikor's bridge, at almost that same moment, he spoke. "The beacon is gone," he said, words coming out in a hoarse whisper that nonetheless carried clearly on the vox. "The song has ended. The Patriarch's call is silenced. The tendril feels the severing. Its will is shifting." Tyberos stood at the strategium rail once more. His armor was still clotted with alien fluids, streaks of congealed ichor and fragments of synaptic core clinging to the grey ceramite. The helmsman and mortal officers around him did not look too closely. The machine spirits of the deck shrank from those stains in ways they had no code for. He looked at the hololithic projection. The icons of the Leviathan branch still glittered, still moved, but their course had begun to alter, very slightly at first, so that only those with long experience could see it, then more visibly. The twin streams of bioships, once curving into closed jaws around Piety 5, began to curl away, their trajectories bending toward richer, less complicated hunting grounds. They did not scatter, they did not rout, they simply turned. The tendril reconsidered. It tasted the loss of a synapse carrier and a planetary brood node, weighed that against the yield this path had promised, and adjusted. The shrine world's psychic light had gone out. The snack was no longer calling from the dark. There were other smells in the void, other beacons, other worlds. The Nikor floated at the edge of that turning, battered and scarred, her escorts thinned to a handful of stubborn, smoking hulls. Tyberos watched the swarm's slow reorientation in silence. Then softly, almost to himself, he spoke. "Denied," he said. The word was not triumph. It was a statement of fact, as cold and simple as the void beyond the hull. The swarm turned away. On the Nikor's hololithic displays, the twin streams of Leviathan's tendril curved back into the dark, trajectories bending away from Piety 5, like a pair of jaws, deciding that the morsel between them was not worth the broken teeth. To the mortal officers watching from their pits, it looked like deliverance. Icons that had been converging now began to slide across the grid, retreat vectors plotted by machine spirits in thin, pale lines. The great synapse carriers altered course, lesser beasts clustering in their wakes like spawn, seeking the shelter of a parent's shadow. Astropathic choirs and sector vox relays would later translate that picture into words like miracle and reprieve. On the Nikor, there was no cheering. The war bark floated amid wreckage, and burning escorts, her own armor scorched and pitted, void shields flickering. But her presence in the display remained the same steady, implacable glyph. The predators had bitten. The prey was drawing back into the deep waters below the galactic plane, calculating new paths, seeking other worlds. Tyberos watched the retreat without blinking. "The tendril is withdrawing," a mortal tactician said, because that was his duty, not because anyone on the bridge could not see it. Projected course takes it back toward the lower marches, away from the shrine world. His voice held the tiniest thread of something like hope. He cut it out halfway through the last word, as if ashamed of it. Takahurangi stood beside the Shade Lord, eyes half-lidded. In his inner vision, the psychic flare of the beacon had gone entirely. The Patriarch was ash in the warp. The synapse carrier's contribution to the lattice had been burned out. The tendril still blazed with the signature of a vast, hungry mind, but it no longer fixed upon Piety 5 like a hooked gaze. "It has marked the loss," the librarian said, voice hoarse. Blood had dried in dark tracks beneath his nose and along his jaw. "It recalculates, that is all. To it, this is a bad bite. An irritation, it turns its head to seek easier meat. To others, that might have been enough. Withdraw the surviving ships, tend to the wounded, file the reports with whatever scribes the Imperium still had for such things, and call it victory that an entire Leviathan branch had not fallen upon a shrine world." Tyberos's helm turned a fraction, lenses taking in the swarm's movement. Then he raised one clawed hand and drew a simple straight line into the retreating icons. "Pursue," he said. There was a moment in which the word did not seem to belong in the same thought as everything their battered flotilla had suffered. Then the bridge crew's training caught up. Orders rippled outward. Engines flared along. The Nikor's flanks, deep thuds reverberating through her bones as she altered course once more, nosing down toward the deep void beneath the galactic plane. The surviving escorts wheeled with her, less a fleet now than a mangled pack, teeth broken, hides torn, still hungry. A shipmaster from one of the Karsharadon's cruisers opened a Vox channel, his features appearing as a washed-out ghost upon a side screen. There was dried blood along one side of his face, where an earlier impact had thrown him from his throne. "We bleed, Shade Lord," he said, without preamble. Around him, his bridge shuddered with each distant hit, light flickering. "Our holds are half-wrecked, our hulls are cracked. If we run into the thick of that again..." Tyberos' reply was as soft as ever. "Then we have their scent," he said. "We do not release it." The shipmaster bowed his head once, a quick jerk. The screen went dark. No one else protested. The Karkaradons did not understand. Victory as escape. They understood it in terms of biomass denied, fear inflicted, scars left in the flanks of the things that stalked the dark. The swarm had chosen to turn from the easy bite of a shrine world. That was its right as predator. It did not mean it would leave unharried. They drove the Nikor and the remaining escorts into the wake of the retreating tendril. In the aftermath of the synaptic shock, the hive ships nearest the destroyed carrier remained disorganized. Their reactions had slowed. Their previous precise formations had broken as command impulses stuttered and rerouted. The Karkaradons exploited that ruthlessly. Where a Leviathan creature sagged out of position, they were upon it, lances raking its flanks, macro cannon pounding at exposed folds of flesh. Where an escort beast's bioweapons fired wide or late, they rammed prows into its side, tearing through chitin, crumpling bone. Boarding torpedoes launched in ragged but constant waves, each a dark dart, aimed at a wounded organ. Teleport flares flickered as strike teams hurled themselves into the interiors of weakened vessels, planting charges in nerve clusters and vital pumps. Within the bioships, battles replayed in miniature. Terminators chopped their way along half-digested corridors, planting melter bombs in the bulging sacs that regulated the ship's movement. Assault Karkaradons hacked into digestion pools, hurling grenades into the churn, turning potential scout organisms into shredded paste. Every detonation, every sabotaged organ, weakened the vessel further. On the Nikor's gun decks, mortal crews watched as hive ships that had once seemed invincible began to come apart under the accumulated assaults. A mid-sized synapse carrier, already wounded by previous engagements, bloomed with internal explosions, its carapace cracking in long fissures. Vents that had been designed to exhale spore clouds, instead vomited flame and chunks of their own structure. The thing folded in, on itself, its death throes sending shockwaves through the swarm's already strained lattice. Another, someone breathed. Each ship destroyed represented an amount of biomass beyond any mortal's meaningful comprehension. Cities' worth, worlds' worth. One less delivery of flesh and bone to the jaws of the greater Leviathan. Takahurangi watched the killing with none of a warrior's satisfaction. He saw the fractures they were inflicting. He saw the gaps opening in the tendrils' internal command structure. He also saw the way the swarm adapted, even as it fled. "See how it reroutes," he murmured, gesture tracing new lines in the hololith. Where a synapse beast had been destroyed, other nodes thickened, neural load redistributed along different strands. Where a particular defensive configuration had failed, new patterns appeared, different beasts moved forward, different bioweapon pairs were brought to the fore. "It is learning," he said. "Even in retreat, it learns. Every time we tear something out of it, the greater whole takes note. This is not just damage, Shadelord. It is instruction." Tyberos did not look away from the display. "Then we will be a hard lesson," he replied. "One it does not profit by cheaply." In the thin atmosphere over Piety 5, spore clouds still drifted, but the main thrust of the tendril no longer drove upon the world. The vanguard organisms already deployed continued their grim work in the outer regions, but they did so without reinforcement or new direction, consuming what they could reach before their biological clocks ran down. Pontefrax itself lay broken. Smoke rose from the shattered spires. The primary cathedral stood, but not as a place of worship. Its doors were blocked by mounds of corpses, its internal frescoes blackened by fire. The great saints that ringed its exterior wore streaks of soot and dried blood like new vestments. Baal Shah moved through the ruins with the precision that would have looked like callousness to an outsider. The mop-up operations he organized did not resemble liberation. Carcharodon's squads moved street by street, level by level, hunting down any surviving cult cells that had been too distant from the Patriarch's direct mind blast to die outright. Their Auspex units pinged faint contacts. Their bolters and blades resolved them. There were no negotiations, no offers of redemption. A world that had sung so loudly to the Great Devourer could not be risked as a cradle for future broodlines. The few surviving Planetary Defense Force units were disarmed and penned in makeshift camps on the city's outskirts, guarded until such time as a retribution fleet could arrive to pass whatever judgment the wider Imperium deemed fit. Shell-shocked civilians wandered in small clumps, eyes blank, sometimes clutching relics, sometimes carrying nothing. The Carcharodons catalogued them, recorded samples, then left them to await the administratum. This was not their war. They had severed the lure. The consequences belonged to other, more bureaucratic predators. Beyond the system's edge, something darker slid into real space. The Wicked Claw arrived late. The Infernus-class battleship unfolded from translation in a shudder of tortured void, her hull a patchwork of scorched black iron and scorched heraldry. Once, long ago, she had worn proud colors. Now those colors were burnt down to char and ash. Strange totems hung from her flanks, chain-bound relics and hazard sigils. Her arrival sent a small tremor through the Nikor's crew decks. The Ashen Claws had answered the pact, but only after the worst had already been decided. They closed with the Carcharodon's position in a slow, deliberate approach that felt less like allies coming to aid and more like a rival shark cruising close enough to taste if the other was wounded. On the Nikor's strategium, the Wicked Claw's icon pulsed. Tyberos accepted. The incoming Vox hails in person. The hollow that fuzzed into being was of a tall, broad-shouldered figure in armor, as scarred and darkened as any Carcharodon's. Nehat Nev wore no helm. His face was lean, lines of age and old injuries marking it. His eyes were bright, alert, amused. "Shade Lord," he said by way of greeting. His accent carried sand and sea in equal measure. "I catch the scent of burnt titan in the dark and find it is only you, gnawing at something larger." Tyberos's helm lenses regarded him in silence for a heartbeat. "The pact was called," he said. He did not waste words on pleasantries. "The prey was great. It remains so. You are late." Nehatnev's smile sharpened. "The void storms around your hunt were unwelcoming," he said, "and I do not have the favor of your cherished Imperium to smooth my passage. We broke ships getting this far. Nevertheless, we are here, and I see you stand amid wreckage that smells of success." "Success is not measured in our standing," Tyberos said. "It is measured in what is dead. You will pay the price all the same." There it was, laid bare. They did not haggle in the way mortal traders did. The currency was understood. War material, ammunition, grafted servitors, gene stock from the worlds the Ashen Claws had raided, tithed in oddly formal ratios, payment for a debt half fulfilled. "Of course," Nehatnev said. His tone was light, but the muscles along his jaw tightened. "If we had arrived earlier, we might have shared more of the sport. As it is, we will share the butcher's fee only." Behind the clipped words lay tension, old history and older grudges. Negotiations were brief. When they ended, the Wicked Claw's holds opened, and a slow procession of lighters and small craft began to ferry across the agreed spoils. Crated munitions, stamped with a dozen different forges' sigils. Bound servitors, their eyes and mouths sewn shut in accordance, with divergent tech creeds. Cryopods loaded with carefully catalogued gene stock. All of it crossing the void like offerings between two temples that agreed on nothing except the necessity of the hunt. Later, in a private Vox link masked from even their own crews, Nehatnev spoke less formally. "You throw your chapter against an ocean, Tyberos," he said, leaning back in his command throne, a faint, humorless smile on his mouth. "You cut chunks from it, yes. You make it spurt and thrash, but in the end, the tide rolls on. Why spend so much of your blood on an enemy that cannot be killed?" Tyberos sat alone in one of the Nikor's shrine chambers, a place where chains of teeth hung from the ceiling and votive lights flickered over carved images of jaws and waves. He had removed his helm again, sitting in stillness that would have unnerved a mortal. "We are not tasked to drain the sea," he said, voice as quiet as ever. "We are tasked to hunt in it." Nehatnev snorted softly. "A fine distinction." "Predators do not ask if the sea can be emptied," Tyberos continued, as if he had not heard. "They ask only if the prey before them can be torn apart. This branch can be. Others will rise. That is for another hunt, another age, perhaps another breed of killer. Ours is now. And if the sea remembers," Nehatnev said, "if it turns on you in particular." Tyberos's mouth twitched, the barest hint of something like anticipation. "Then it will come to us," he said, "and we will not have to seek." The link cut with a soft crackle. In the deeps, they made one last lesson for the tendril to carry back to its greater self. A hive ship, larger than any they had yet destroyed, loomed at the edge of their reach, its vast bulk laboring as it tried to slip fully back toward the underplane. It was not the core of the tendril, not the spinal brain. It was a great reservoir of biomass, a swollen gut meant to deliver flesh to distant, future assaults. The Nikor turned to face it. Power bled through the war-bark's skeleton as the plasma destructor cycled up. The weapon's capacitors drew energy from every corner of the ship, dimming lumen strips, making Vox units crackle. Tech adepts chanted in harsh Binharic, soothing machine spirits that wailed at being pushed so close to their limits. On the gun decks, mortals looked up despite themselves, feeling the hair on their arms lift with the static. In the strategium, Tyberos watched the targeting rune lock onto the hive ship's center mass. "Fire," he said. The plasma destructor spoke. For an instant, a spear of star-white brilliance leapt out from the Nikor's dorsal spine, a column of contained fury that cut across the void and bit into the heart of the fleeing Leviathan. The beam burned through organic armor and neural layers, punching a hole clean through the creature's torso. The hive ship cracked. Its internal pressures, unbalanced, tore it along that line, splitting the vast organism in two. Gouts of burning matter fountained into the surrounding dark. For a heartbeat, the deeps were lit by an artificial sun, a brief blossom of light that threw the scars on the Nikor's hull into sharp relief and turned the nearby wreckage into stark silhouettes. To the mortal eyes aboard, it looked as though they had truly annihilated a piece of the Devourer. Takahurangi stood at the edge of the strategium, eyes closed. He tasted the psychic echo of that kill as a fading scream, a strand in the greater roar. Pain and loss thrummed along the lattice. Then, beneath it, something subtler. Interest, far beyond the reach of any single ship or world. In portions of the hive mind's incomprehensible totality, a sliver of attention shifted. Not anger, not yet. Simply a marking of difference. A noting of the flavor of resistance in this region of space. The peculiar sting of these grey-armored predators that hunted in silence and followed the scent even into the worst currents. "We have its notice," he murmured. No one on the bridge challenged him. No one asked what that meant for the future. The Nikor turned, engines rumbling, her prow angling back toward the shadowed paths of the deeps, leaving behind a broken shrine world, shattered hive ships, and the faint, lingering impression of a vast, alien gaze that had, for a moment, glanced their way before turning back to the wider, endless feast of the galaxy. The first Imperial ship to make orbit over Piety 5 arrived too late to save anything. It came at the head of a retribution force, a spear of cruisers and troop carriers and black-hulled vessels marked with the sigils of the Ordo. Their holds were full of penitent guard regiments and ecclesiarchal flagellants, their vox banks seethed with prepared proclamations of cleansing and reconsecration. They saw the truth in the first Auspex sweep. Pontefrax lay in ruin, the proud shrine hives. Spires were broken stumps, their gilded tips scattered like bones. Great patches of the city were simple absence, melted away by weapon strikes or eaten by something far worse. The surrounding settlements were little more than charred smears on the planetary crust. Landers descended through a sky that still stank faintly of spore and smoke. Survey teams in sealed hazard suits picked their way through streets where the wind stirred drifts of ash and the occasional exposed length of bone. They found corpses. They found too many corpses. In some places the dead lay as they had fallen, strewn in waves that showed the direction of flight and the moment when that flight had been cut short. In other places they had been stacked, piled into obscene mounds at choke points, barricades of flesh that had become monuments when the fighting moved on. On the walls of the primary cathedral, they found marks, not of the cult. Those signs had been broken, burned, scraped away with brutal thoroughness. These were new, or older, depending on how one counted such things. Great jaw sigils had been scorched into the black stone, the pale scars stark against the smoke stains. The shapes were not quite imperial, not quite any chapter heraldry recorded in the fortresses of the administratum. They were stylized, jaws open, teeth bared, as if something had bitten the very heart of the shrine and left its impression there as a warning or as a signature. There were no grey-armored giants waiting to greet them, no Carcharodons lingering to explain what they had done. They had already gone. By the time the first retribution force had trudged up the nave of the cathedral, staring in hollow awe at the corpse mountains and the cracked, blood-smeared frescoes, the Nikor and her pack had long since slipped back into the outer dark, their drives throttled down, hull lights dimmed. What remained of the third company was scattered through the ship's decks, armor in pieces, wounds, dressed in rough, efficient fashion by serfs and apothecaries. In Administratum Scriptoria and Inquisitorial Archive vaults, arguments began. Some adepts, peering at the fragmented astropathic data and half-corrupted Pict logs, pointed to the change in Leviathan's course. They drew careful lines on star maps, plotting the tendril's path before and after the day the Shrine World died, and claimed in thin, tight voices that the Carcharodons had saved not merely Piety 5, but the worlds that lay behind it. Others looked at the casualty reports. They saw the population numbers reduced to almost nothing, the sacred relics destroyed or rendered suspect beyond all redemption. They saw a shrine world that had once anchored belief across a dozen neighboring systems reduced to a grim marker where retribution fleets went to practice their rites of wrath. They asked what had truly been saved. The Devourer would have eaten those souls either way, they said. Now the Imperium had simply done its work for it. In the end, the debate was reduced to ink. Buried deep in a dry volume of the Segmentum's strategic history, a single line was added in crabbed High Gothic beneath a list of far grander entries. Minor Xenos actions by unidentified Astartes elements in the deeps appear to have diverted one tendril of the third major hive incursion for some decades. Event designated, the Devourer denied. No statues were raised for that. On the Nicor, they counted the dead in a different ledger. The chapter's apothecaries moved through the arming halls and infirmaria with gene scanners and sensors, making note of which progenoids had been recovered and which had been lost beyond recall. The tally was brutal. Whole companies had been reduced to handfuls. The third company, once a full claw in the chapter's hunting jaw, now numbered barely more than a reinforced squad. The Red Brethren had been bled almost white. There were suits of tactical dreadnought armor on the racks now that would never move again, their machine spirits sunk into sulks or silent mourning, their sarcophagus harnesses empty. In the Strategium, Tyberos stood over a different projection. The hololith did not show the swarm now. It showed the Carcharodons. Lines of runes marched across it, each representing a brother. Some glowed steady, some flickered, marked for grievous injury. Too many were darkened entirely, bearing the simple notation of harvest attempted, gene seed recovered or lost. Tech adepts and mortal scribes waited with slates ready, hoping for some reduction in the demands they would be expected to carry out. The Nicor's coffers were not infinite. The chapter's stores of war gear and gene stock had limits. Tyberos regarded the numbers and dismissed them. Red tithes will proceed at full measure, he said. No reduction. The worlds gifted after the Badab campaign remain fertile. We will take what we are owed. There will be new brothers to fill these ranks. A scribal serf ventured a cautious query. The seas there are thin, my lord, he said, eyes downcast. The populations have been scoured. The tithe rate we set after the last harvest already takes the strongest of each cohort. If we push harder, there may be less. Less left for whom? Tyberos asked mildly. The serf swallowed. For the Administratum, he whispered. Tyberos' gaze moved from the projection to the man. His eyes were flat, pale, shark-like. They did not blaze with anger. They did not need to. We are not here to preserve stock for other predators, he said. We are here to feed our own. The deeps are wide. The Imperium is drowning. It will not miss what we take. The matter was settled. In a smaller, darker chamber deeper in the ship, Teka-Hurangi sat with the remaining librarians. The strategia they used was not the primary one, with its grand hololiths and brass rails. This was a shrine room whose walls had been overlaid with star maps, each dot marking a world they had touched, each line a path they had taken through the unlit reaches. Candles burned low in niches. Faint, phosphor-stained icons of jaws and waves glimmered under the chart overlays. The hum of the Nika's engines was a constant presence, a reminder that the beast they rode never truly slept. Teka-Hurangi felt old. His body did not show it much. Astarte's physiology did not sag and wrinkle the way mortal flesh did. The signs were in the heaviness of his gaze, in the way his fingers lingered a moment longer than they once would have on the parchment edges of a star chart, tracing paths he had walked before. "The war in the deeps is not ended," one of the younger librarians said. His scalp tattoos were still bright, lines not yet blurred by repeated over-etching. "There are splinter fleets still drifting beneath the plain. We have cut many. We can continue. Each one we annihilate is one less that will rise into the light." Te Kahurangi nodded slowly. "That is true," he said, "and also untrue." He tapped one of the mapped lines with the butt of his staff. It represented the course they had traced of the Leviathan branch they had just mauled. It curled away into the blank, toward regions no imperial chart marked with anything but broad, hesitant strokes. "We have destroyed countless splinters," he said. "We have cut out whole tongues of the beast before they could taste worlds. And yet, when I look into the warp..." He trailed off for a moment, eyes shuttering as he remembered the psychic presence that had towered over Piety 5. "It is like dropping stones into an ocean," he finished. "Each one makes a splash, each one creates ripples, but the shoreline does not move." Silence settled among the psychers. "The Devourer will come again," he went on, voice low, "in greater numbers than any single chapter can comprehend. Behemoth was a herald, Kraken a wound, Leviathan is not the last. Others stir in the dark between galaxies. Some will follow paths we are not near enough to contest. Some will rise in places where there are no hunters left at all." He looked up as the door opened. Tyberos entered without ceremony, his presence shrinking the space, despite the chamber's size. He carried no helm, no claws, only the weight of his own inevitability. Te Kahurangi met his gaze. "We have thrown ourselves against branches of this thing until our armor cracks," the librarian said. "We have annihilated more splinter fleets than any scribe will ever record. And still, when I look at the grand sum, I see barely a change, a percentage so small it is lost in the rounding." He allowed himself that one numerical word, then corrected softly. "We are a fraction, Shade Lord, a sliver. The galaxy's calculus remains the same." Tyberos considered that for a heartbeat. "The galaxy's sums are not ours to balance," he said. "We are only the subtracting blade." The words hung in the air, stark and simple. Te Kahurangi nodded, slow, reluctant. "A blade can be worn down," he said. Tyberos's mouth twitched, not quite into a smile. "Then we cut until we break," he replied, "and feed the sea our shards. What comes after us will decide if there is more cutting to be done." In the lower decks, the mortals told their own tales. Serfs in the mess halls, gunnery crews hunched over ration slop, tithed slaves cleaning ichor from bulkheads, all shared the same haunted, whispered stories. They spoke of the day the Nikor's guns had lit the deeps like false dawn, burning holes through living worlds. They spoke of boarding alarms and of what little glimpses they had caught through battered view slits of hive ships tearing open from within, spilling steaming ruin into the void. Some had seen picked captures of the Patriarch's fall on Piety 5, grainy frames of a monstrous shape rearing in a cathedral nave, its shadow eating the light before toppling. They described their masters in the same breath as the monsters, grey giants whose silence was heavier than shouting, eyes behind lenses that did not change when they watched a world burn, hands that had held synaptic organs still dripping and then wiped them clean on ceramite as if they were nothing more than grease. To those mortals, the Carcharodons were not saviors. They were rival predators who happened, on this occasion, to be tearing at something worse. In a rare, unguarded moment, Te Kahurangi found his thoughts drifting in the same direction. He stood alone in one of the ship's observation niches, watching the faint smear of the Astronomicon as it struggled to reach this far into the underplane. Vox traffic was minimal. The Nikor glided between stars like a shadow that had grown tired of being anchored to any one surface. Guardians, he murmured to himself. Or simply competitors at the top of the same food chain. Imperial histories would not answer that. He had seen enough archive fragments to know how chapters like his were recorded, when they were recorded at all. A footnote here, a vague reference there. Grey armored Astartes sighted at the fringes of some calamity, leaving behind dead Xenos and silence. Anonymous angels of death, omitted from triumphal lists and campaign rolls, their heraldry blurred or miscopied, their oaths given and kept in the dark where no chronicler's candlelight reached. Perhaps that was fitting. The Nikor's trophy vaults were not for outside eyes. Tyberos walked their length in solitude, the echo of his steps swallowed by the mutters of caged machine spirits and the faint clink of hanging relics. On one wall, iron racks held skulls. Some were human, their brows still bearing the faint ghosts of traitor marks. Others were Xenos, elongated, ridged or fanged, each secured by chains and nails, each inscribed with terse kill script. Names of worlds, names of campaigns, names of sins. Opposite them, in newer alcoves, hung the trophies of this latest hunt. Fragments of Leviathan's carapace, plates bleached from their deep purple to a sickly white by whatever rites the chapter's tech marines had used to stabilize them. Ossified synaptic nodes, twisted, root-like things grown hard as stone, their once pulsing cores now dull. Tyberos paused before one such node. In his mind's eye, he saw again the way it had looked before he tore it free, throbbing with pale inner light, threads of power running along its length. He remembered the feel of it crushing between hunger and slake, the brief flare of resistance, the way the hive ship had spasmed around that act. He reached out and touched the fossilized remnant with one finger. "Until we die," he murmured, words meant for himself and for whatever spirits might be listening, machine or otherwise. Or until the void is empty, whichever comes first. He did not know which he believed more likely. Beyond the Nikor's hull, the narrative pulled back. High above the deeps, in the thick light of the galactic plane, the High Lords and their advisors traced arcs on star charts. Leviathan's main branches were the ones they cared about, the great curving lines that cut across Segmenta, the ones that required entire crusades to slow, entire sectors' worth of sacrifice to divert. Sages and inquisitors and chapter masters argued over how best to deploy fleets and chapters in the face of those oncoming tsunamis of chitin. In some margin of those maps, an adept had added a note. Minor Xenos actions in the underplane have delayed one tendril in rising into populated regions. Estimated delay measured in a handful of decades. Action undertaken by unidentified Astartes, operating beyond normal Imperial command structures. No one in that chamber dwelt long upon it. There were too many other crises, too many other jaws, far below their concern in the dark. Between mapped lanes, the Carcharodon's fleet vanished again. No proud broadcast announced their departure. No banners unfurled. Vox remained tight beam and minimal. Transmissions kept to what was necessary to keep ships from ramming one another in the thickest storms. From the vantage of Piety 5's ravaged orbit, they were there one span of breaths and gone the next, grey hulls slipping back into the unlit currents beneath the spiral arm, hull lights extinguished, weapons silent for now. They left only the red wake of what they had done, on a shrine world reduced to ash and scar, in the stuttering of a hive fleet tendril's path, in the new lines etched into administratum ledgers. Far beyond even their reach, in the silent gulf between galaxies, something vast and patient shifted slightly. The greater Leviathan horde did not brood over individual losses. It did not nurse grudges. It simply added data. Somewhere in its unfathomable mind sea, A pattern was updated. Flavor noted. Silent grey predators that hunted in the deeps. Teeth that bit even when the jaw turned away. The next time a tendril brushed the lower marches of the galactic disk, the memory would be there, faint but present. A taste of hunger and slake caught in a billion maws. In the meantime, the sea rolled on, and the sharks went with it, unseen beneath the swell.